During a Thanksgiving bash, my daughter-in-law's dad splashed bourbon all over my face. She snickered, saying, "Take that, you worthless old buzzard, and learn your place." My blood boiled, but I grinned and dialed one number. They had zero idea the nightmare I had just unleashed on their pathetic lives. My name is Thaddeus Clay, but back in the days when I was pouring concrete for the foundations of half the skyline in this city, they called me Iron Clay. I am 72 years old, and I have learned that silence is often the loudest sound in the room, especially when you are the only black man in a room full of people who think they are better than you. The crystal chandelier above the dining table cast a warm, golden glow over the roasted turkey, the candied yams, and the bottles of wine that cost more than my first car. The air smelled of sage and expensive perfume, but underneath it all I could smell the rot. I stood near the heavy oak door of the dining room clutching a glass of water. I was wearing my best Sunday suit. It was 10 years old, charcoal gray, and perfectly pressed, but next to the Italian silk suits of the other guests, I looked like the hired help. And that was exactly how they treated me. This was my son Marcus' house. Or rather, it was the house Marcus lived in. I was the one who signed the check for the down payment, and I was the one who quietly paid off the mortgage 3 years ago so my son wouldn't have to carry that debt. But nobody in this room knew that except Marcus and his wife Brittany. And looking at them now, you would never guess I was anything more than an embarrassing relic they had been forced to invite. Marcus was sitting at the head of the table, looking nervous. He kept glancing at me, then looking away quickly, fixing his eyes on his plate. He was 32 years old, a grown man, but in this house he had the posture of a beaten dog. His wife Brittany sat to his right. She was glowing with that specific kind of arrogance that comes from never having worked a day in her life. She was laughing loudly at a joke her father had just told her, hand resting possessively on Marcus' shoulder as if he were a pet she was showing off. And then there was Preston Walsh, Brittany's father. Preston was a big man with a face flushed red from too much alcohol and blood pressure that was likely through the roof. He was a real estate developer, a man who liked to talk about building empires, but I knew for a fact his empire was built on a foundation of sand and high-interest loans. He was standing near the fireplace, swirling a glass of amber liquid, holding court with 3 other men who were hanging on his every word. I tried to make myself invisible. I was only here for my grandson Leo. I wanted to see his eyes light up when I gave him the wooden truck I had carved for him in my workshop. But Leo had been whisked away by the nanny hours ago, and I was left standing here listening to Preston voice boom across the room. "You have to be ruthless," Preston shouted, slurring his words slightly. "That is the problem with this country nowadays. Everyone wants a handout. Nobody wants to work. I built my company from the ground up. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps." I almost laughed out loud. I knew Preston history. He inherited his first 2 buildings from his grandmother. He didn't know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition, but I kept my mouth shut. I just wanted to get through dinner, give Leo his gift, and go back to my quiet apartment. Suddenly, Preston's eyes locked onto me. He stopped talking. The room went quiet as his gaze drilled into me. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a shark gives before it bites. "Well, look who is hiding in the corner," Preston boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "It is Mr. Clay. I didn't see you there, Thaddeus. You blend in so well with the shadows." A few guests chuckled nervously. Brittany sipped her wine, watching with amusement. "Good evening, Preston," I said, keeping my voice even. "Happy Thanksgiving." Preston walked toward me, swaying slightly. He held his glass out toward me. "Since you are standing there, Thaddeus, be a good man, and get me a refill, would you? The bar is right behind you. And make it a double. This cheap stuff Marcus bought is barely drinkable." The insult was double-edged. He was calling my son cheap, and he was treating me like a waiter. I saw Marcus stiffen in his chair, but he didn't say a word. He just stared at his fork. I did not move. I looked at the bar, then back at Preston. "The bottle is right there, Preston," I said calmly. "I think your legs still work fine." The room went deadly silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Preston's face turned a darker shade of crimson. He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space. I could smell the sour bourbon on his breath. "Excuse me," Preston sneered. "I think you are confused about the hierarchy here, Thaddeus. You are in my daughter house. You are eating food I paid for. When I ask for a drink, you pour it. That is how it works. You people should be used to serving by now, right?" The racial undertone hung in the air like toxic smoke. I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced them open. I had spent 50 years dealing with men like Preston. Anger was what they wanted. It made them feel powerful. Indifference was what destroyed them. "I am a guest here, Preston, just like you," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "And as for the food, you did not pay for it. Marcus did. And as for this house, well, let us just say you would be surprised who actually owns the roof over your head." Preston's eyes narrowed. He didn't like being challenged, especially not in front of his wealthy friends. He laughed a harsh barking sound. "Oh, listen to him," Preston shouted, turning to the guests. "The old bricklayer thinks he is a businessman. He thinks because he mixed some cement back in the 70s, he sits at the big table. Let me tell you something, Thaddeus. You are nothing. You are a broke, lonely old man who wears a suit from a thrift store. My daughter tolerates you because she has a kind heart. But do not mistake pity for respect." He turned back to me, his eyes full of malice. "Now pour the damn drink." I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't blink. I didn't retreat. I stood tall, my spine straight, the same spine that had carried bags of cement up 10 flights of stairs when I was 20. "No," I said. Preston's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. In one smooth motion, he pulled his arm back and threw the contents of his glass right into my face. The cold liquid hit me like a slap. The burning sting of high-proof alcohol filled my eyes. The smell of bourbon flooded my nose, choking me. The amber liquid dripped down my forehead, soaking into the collar of my white shirt, staining my gray suit jacket. Gasps erupted around the room. One woman dropped her fork with a clatter. For a second, I couldn't see. I just stood there feeling the humiliating drip of the alcohol running down my cheeks like tears. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand slowly. Preston was breathing hard, chest heaving. "That is what you get," he spat. "You worthless old buzzard. Learn your place." I opened my eyes. They were stinging, but my vision was clear, crystal clear. I looked at the table. Brittany was covering her mouth, but her eyes were crinkled in amusement. She let out a short, sharp giggle. "Oops," she said. "I guess you should have just poured the drink, Thaddeus. Dad gets cranky when he is thirsty." I looked at Marcus. My son. The boy I had raised alone after his mother died. The boy I had worked 18-hour shifts for so he could go to college. Marcus was gripping the tablecloth so hard his knuckles were white. He looked up at me for 1 second. In his eyes I saw fear. I saw shame. But I did not see a man. I saw a coward. He looked back down at his plate, avoiding my gaze. He said nothing. He did absolutely nothing. That silence hurt more than the alcohol in my eyes. It broke something inside me. It severed the last thread of patience I had been holding on to for years. I took a deep breath. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. I dabbed my face, calmly, not rushing. The room was watching me, waiting for me to explode, waiting for me to yell or throw a punch so they could call the police and have the crazy old black man arrested. But I didn't give them that satisfaction. I folded the handkerchief and put it back in my pocket. I looked at Preston, who was now smirking, thinking he had won, thinking he had put the dog back in its kennel. "Thank you for the drink, Preston," I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. "It tastes expensive. I hope you have enough money left in your bank account to buy the next one, because from what I hear, liquidity is going to be a real problem for you starting tomorrow." Preston frowned, deepened confusion flickering in his eyes. "What are you babbling about?" he muttered. I didn't answer. I turned to Brittany. "The turkey looks dry," I said, "but do not worry. You will not have to cook next year. You will not have a kitchen like this to cook in." Before she could respond, I turned and walked out of the dining room. My shoes clicked against the marble floor, echoing in the silence. I walked past my son without looking at him. He didn't deserve my gaze. Not anymore. I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped out into the cool November night air. I walked down the long driveway past Preston luxury sedan and Marcus Range Rover. When I reached the end of the driveway, I stopped under the street lamp. My face was sticky and my suit was ruined, but I felt cleaner than I had in years. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. I scrolled down to a contact I had saved simply as the Shark. It rang once. "Yes, Mr. Clay," the voice on the other end answered instantly, sharp and alert. Jonas was the best corporate attorney in the state, and I paid him enough to pick up the phone on Thanksgiving. "Jonas," I said, staring back at the glowing windows of the mansion where my family was laughing at my humiliation. "I want to activate Clause 13. There was a pause on the other line. A heavy pause. Jonas knew what that meant. It was the nuclear option. The button we had agreed never to push unless there was no turning back. "Are you sure?" Thaddeus Jonas asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Clause 13 means immediate recall of all debts. It means foreclosure. It means asset freezing. It will bankrupt Preston Walsh by sunrise. And given the cross-collateralization with your son business, it will wipe Marcus out too. They will be on the street. I looked at the stain on my jacket. I remembered Marcus looking at the floor while his father-in-law assaulted me. "I am sure," I said. "And Jonas," "Yes, sir. Cancel the lease on the mansion. Send the eviction notice tonight. I want it taped to their front door before they finish their pumpkin pie." "Understood, Mr. Clay. Consider it done." I hung up the phone. The screen went dark. I turned my back on the house and began the long walk to the bus stop. The cold wind bit at my face, but I didn't feel it. I felt the warmth of the fire I had just lit. A fire that was going to burn everything they had to the ground. Preston thought he had splashed a helpless old man with bourbon. He didn't know he had just poured gasoline on a dragon. The wind outside the mansion was biting, but I barely felt it as I walked down the long driveway. My face was sticky with the bourbon Preston had thrown at me, but my hands were dry and steady as I held the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end was calm, precise, and deadly. Jonas didn't ask questions, he just executed orders. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you didn't want a settlement, you wanted a scorched earth. Clause 13. Jonas repeated slowly, as if giving me one last chance to pull back from the ledge. "Thaddeus, you know exactly what that entails. That is the acceleration clause. It converts the entire debt structure into an immediate demand for payment. If they cannot pay the full $20 million within 24 hours, we seize the collateral. All of it. The company equipment, the commercial properties, and yes, even the personal assets pledged as security." I reached the end of the driveway and looked back at the house one last time. Through the large bay windows, I could see them. Preston was laughing, slapping another man on the back, probably boasting about how he had put the old help in his place. Brittany was preening in her white dress, oblivious to the fact that the roof over her head was about to belong to the bank. And Marcus, my son, was still staring at the floor, a ghost in his own life. "Do it, Jonas," I said into the phone, my voice low and final. "File the papers electronically tonight. I want every account frozen before dessert is served. I want the notification to hit his inbox while he is still drunk on his own arrogance." "Understood," Jonas said. "The paperwork was already drafted months ago just in case. I am initiating the protocol now. Blue Collar Holdings is officially calling in the debt." I hung up the phone and watched the screen go black. Blue Collar Holdings. The name sounded generic, boring even. Just another investment firm in a city full of them. That was the point. Preston Walsh had no idea that Blue Collar Holdings was me. He had no idea that the silent investor who had bought up his toxic debt 6 months ago was the same man he had just called a worthless buzzard. I had done it to protect them. That was the irony that tasted bitter in my mouth. 6 months ago, I had seen the cracks in Preston's empire. He was over-leveraged, bleeding cash, and desperate. I knew that if he went down, he would drag Marcus down with him, because my son had foolishly signed as a guarantor on some of Preston's loans. So I stepped in. I used my shell company to buy the debt from the bank, quietly keeping Preston afloat so my son wouldn't lose everything. I had planned to slowly restructure the company from the shadows to save them from themselves. I was the safety net they didn't know existed. But tonight, I took a knife and I slashed the net. I didn't wait for a bus. A black town car pulled up to the curb a minute later. The driver stepped out and opened the door. "Good evening, Mr. Clay," he said respectfully. "To the penthouse, sir." "Yes, James," I said, sliding into the leather interior. "Take me home." Most people thought I lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the south side. And I did stay there sometimes to keep myself grounded, to remember where I came from. But Thaddeus Clay didn't build half this city just to live in a box. The car glided through the city streets away from the suburbs and toward the skyline. We pulled into the underground garage of the Clay Tower, the 40-story building I had completed 5 years ago. I took the private elevator to the top floor. The doors opened, and I stepped into silence, my real home. It was a sanctuary of glass and steel, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire city. The floors were Italian marble. The furniture was minimalist and expensive. There were no doilies, no clutter, just open space and power. I walked to the bar and poured myself a glass of bourbon. A real bourbon. A 30-year-old single malt that cost more than Preston's entire wardrobe. I took a sip, letting the smooth liquid wash away the taste of the cheap swill Preston had thrown at me. I walked over to the wall of monitors in my study. I had installed a security system in Marcus' house 2 years ago after a string of break-ins in their neighborhood. They knew the cameras were there, of course, but they had forgotten that I was the administrator. I had told them I didn't know how to use the app, that I was too old for technology. They believed me because arrogance always makes you underestimate your opponent. I tapped the tablet on my desk and the screens flickered to life. The party was in full swing. The audio was crisp. I could hear the jazz music playing softly in the background. I could hear the clinking of glasses. I sat down in my leather chair and watched. It was like watching a nature documentary about a herd of gazelles grazing peacefully, unaware that the lion was already in the tall grass. Preston was at the bar again. He was red-faced, sweating slightly, shouting a story to a group of bored-looking wives. So I told him. "Look here, old man," Preston bellowed, gesturing wildly with his empty glass. "You might have mixed the concrete for this city, but I own it now." You should have seen his face. He looked like a kicked puppy. The group laughed politely. Brittany was nearby sipping champagne. She looked radiant and cruel. "Honestly, Dad, you were too nice to him," Brittany said, rolling her eyes. "I have been telling Ethan for months that we need to cut him off. He is just dead weight. He embarrasses us. Did you see that suit? It smelled like mothballs." I took another sip of my bourbon. My hand tightened on the glass, but I forced myself to relax. Dead weight. That was what she called the man who had paid for her college tuition when her father claimed he was having a liquidity crisis. On the screen, I saw a waiter approach Preston. It was a young man, probably a college student working for extra holiday cash. He looked terrified. He was holding a small silver tray with a credit card on it. Preston waved him away, annoyed. "Just run it again, kid. The machine is probably broken." I leaned forward in my chair. "Here it comes." The waiter whispered something, leaning in close so as not to cause a scene, but the microphones picked it up. "Sir, I have run it 3 times. The system says the card has been seized. Not declined, sir. Seized. The bank ordered us to confiscate it." Preston froze. The smile dropped from his face like a mask falling off. He snatched the card from the tray. "That is impossible," he hissed loud enough for the people nearby to turn their heads. "This is a Platinum Amex. There is no limit. Do you know who I am?" "I am sorry, sir," the waiter stammered, shrinking back. "The code is fraud alert, asset freeze. I cannot give the card back." Preston's face went from red to purple. "Give me that damn machine," he shouted, grabbing the portable terminal from the waiter's hand. He jammed the card in himself, his fingers fumbling. He punched in his PIN code aggressively. On my screen, I watched the little digital readout on the terminal. I knew exactly what it was going to say. I had authorized Jonas to flag every single account linked to his social security number. Beep. The sound was sharp and final. Transaction denied. Contact issuer immediately. Preston stared at the machine. He shook it as if it were a broken toy. Brittany walked over, her brow furrowed in annoyance. "Dad, what is going on?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "People are staring. Just use the other card." "I tried the Visa too," Preston whispered, and for the first time I heard genuine panic in his voice. "It didn't work." "None of them are working." "What do you mean, none of them?" Brittany hissed. "I mean zero, zip, the corporate card, the personal account, even the emergency line. They are all dead." A silence started to spread outward from the bar. The music seemed to get quieter. Guests stopped talking, sensing the tension. In these circles, money was like oxygen. When it ran out, everyone noticed immediately. I sat back in my chair in the penthouse, watching the panic begin to set in. It was a slow burn. Preston was patting his pockets, pulling out his phone. He was trying to open his banking app. I saw him tapping furiously on the screen. Then he stopped. He stared at his phone, his mouth hanging open slightly. "What is it?" Brittany asked, grabbing his arm. Preston looked up and his eyes scanned the room wildly. He wasn't looking at the guests. He was looking for a lifeline. "My accounts," he whispered hoarsely. "They are gone, not empty. Gone. Access revoked." He looked around the room as if the walls were closing in on him, and in a way they were. I took one last sip of my drink and set the glass down on the coaster. "Happy Thanksgiving, Preston," I said to the empty room. The nightmare had officially begun. And the best part was he still thought this was just a glitch. He didn't know that tomorrow morning he wouldn't just be broke. He would be my employee. and I was going to be the most demanding boss he had ever met. The sun rose over the city skyline, bathing my penthouse living room in a sharp, cold light. It was the day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday. For most of America, it was a day of chaotic shopping and fighting over discounted televisions. For my daughter-in-law, Brittany, it was a religious holiday. It was the day she usually spent thousands of dollars on handbags she didn't need and shoes she would only wear once to impress people she didn't even like. I sat in my leather armchair watching the steam rise from my black coffee. The city looked peaceful from 40 stories up. Down below, I knew the malls were opening their doors. I knew Brittany would be there, right at the front of the line at the luxury boutiques. She loved the attention. She loved flashing that platinum card I had given Marcus 5 years ago. It was a supplementary card attached to my primary business account. I had given it to him for emergencies, for medical bills, for car repairs. But over the years, the definition of emergency had shifted. An emergency became a limited edition Gucci tote bag. An emergency became a spa weekend because she was stressed from doing absolutely nothing. I took a sip of coffee and looked at my tablet. I had the banking app open. At 9:15 in the morning, exactly the first notification popped up. Attempted transaction Gucci. Amount $4,500. Status declined. Reason card deactivated by primary account holder. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I just felt a cold sense of satisfaction. It was the feeling of a structural engineer watching a controlled demolition. You don't laugh when the building comes down. You just watch to make sure it falls exactly where you calculated it would. 2 minutes later, another notification. Attempted transaction Gucci. Amount $4,500. Status declined. She was trying again. She probably told the cashier there was a chip error. She probably wiped the card on her expensive cashmere sweater and handed it back with that condescending smile she used on service workers. Attempted transaction Gucci. Amount $1,000. Status declined. She was trying a smaller amount now. Desperation was setting in. Then my phone rang. It was Marcus. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to think about what he was going to say. I wanted him to remember the silence he had offered me last night when his father-in-law assaulted me. I slid my thumb across the screen and put the phone to my ear. I didn't say hello. I just listened. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Marcus' voice was high-pitched, bordering on hysterical. I could hear background noise, the hum of a busy store, the murmur of shoppers. "Good morning, Marcus," I said calmly. "You sound upset." "Upset? I am furious. Brittany is at the register at Gucci. She has a line of people behind her. The card isn't working. She says it is coming up as deactivated. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is? The manager is looking at her like she is a criminal." I took another sip of coffee. The rich, bitter taste filled my mouth. "Is she?" I asked. "That is unfortunate." "Dad, fix it," Marcus snapped. "Call the bank right now. Tell them it is a mistake. She is literally standing there holding up the line. She is crying. Dad." She called me in tears. She says people are staring. I set my coffee cup down on the coaster. "I will not be calling the bank, Marcus," I said. "There is no mistake. I canceled the card this morning." There was a silence on the other end, a stunned, heavy silence. "You what?" Marcus whispered. "I canceled it," I repeated. "And not just that one. I canceled the gas cards, the grocery account, the country club membership, all of it." But why? Marcus shouted, and I could hear the panic rising in his throat. "Why would you do that today of all days? It is Black Friday." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the sprawling city that I had helped build with my own 2 hands. "Marcus, do you remember what your father-in-law said to me last night?" "What?" "Dad, come on. He was drunk. Do not be petty. He said I was a worthless old buzzard." I continued, ignoring his interruption. "He said I was a nobody. He said I should learn my place, and he threw a drink in my face, a drink that I paid for in a house that I own." "Dad," he apologized. "Well, he didn't really, but he feels bad." "Brittany said he feels bad." I chuckled, but there was no humor in it. It was a dry, dusty sound. "He feels bad. That is touching." "But here is the thing, Marcus. Preston made a very good point. He said, I am just a bricklayer, just a laborer. He made it very clear that my kind is not welcome in your world. Dad, please, Brittany is waiting." So I did some thinking. I said, my voice dropping to a low rumble, "If I am just a dirty old trash man, then my money must be dirty too, right? It must be filthy. And I would hate to soil Brittany's delicate hands with my dirty bricklayer money." I am doing her a favor, Marcus. I am saving her from the indignity of spending money that comes from a worthless old buzzard. There was a pause. I could hear Marcus breathing heavily. Dad, stop it. You are proving his point. You are being vindictive. Just turn the card back on. I will talk to Preston. I will get him to apologize. Just don't humiliate us like this. Humiliate you? I asked sharply. You stood there, Marcus. You stood there and watched a man assault your father, and you stared at your shoes. You humiliated yourself. I am just balancing the ledger. I looked at the time on my tablet. 9:25. And Marcus. Since we are discussing assets, let us talk about the car. The car, Marcus asked, confused. What car? The Range Rover autobiography you are driving, I said. The black one. The one with the heated massage seats and the custom rims. What about it? It is in my name, Marcus. The lease is under Clay Construction. I let you drive it as a company perk. But you don't work for Clay Construction anymore, do you? You are a director at Preston Company now. Dad, you gave me that car. I allowed you to use it, I corrected him. There is a difference. And since I am cutting unnecessary overheads, I am recalling the vehicle. You can't be serious, Marcus stammered. I need that car. I have meetings. I have to pick up Leo from school. You can take the bus, I said, or maybe Preston can lend you one of his cars. Oh, wait, he can't, because the bank is seizing his fleet this afternoon. Dad, please. Here are your options, Marcus, I said, checking my watch again. You can return the car to my office garage by 1 o'clock this afternoon. That gives you 3.5 hours. Or if you want to keep it, you can assume the lease payments plus the insurance. Fine, Marcus said quickly. Fine, I will pay the lease. How much is it? 600, 700. I laughed. This boy had no idea what things cost. He had lived in a bubble of subsidized luxury his entire adult life. The lease is $1,800 a month, I said. Insurance is another $400 because of Brittany driving record, plus maintenance. Let us round it up. $2,500 a month, payable to Clay Construction. First month due immediately via wire transfer. $2,500, Marcus choked out. Dad, I don't have that kind of cash liquid, you know that. We spent everything on the renovation and the trip to Cabo. Then you don't have a car, I said simply. I am not bringing it back, Marcus shouted. You can't make me. It is in my driveway. Marcus, listen to me very carefully, I said, leaning forward as if he could see me through the phone. I have a spare key, and I have a repossession team on retainer. They are parked 2 blocks from your house right now. If that car is not in my garage by 1 o'clock, or if the money is not in my account, they will come and take it. And they won't be polite about it. They will hook it up right in front of the neighbors, and you know how much Brittany hates the neighbors seeing anything ugly. You are ruining my life, Marcus screamed. No, son, I said softly. I am teaching you how to build one, because the one you are living in right now is made of paper, and I just lit a match. I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down. I just pressed the red button and set it back on the table. I looked back at the tablet. Attempted transaction, Uber Black. Amount, $80. Status, declined. I watched the screen for a moment longer. Brittany was stuck at the mall. She couldn't buy her bag. She couldn't even buy a ride home. She would have to call Marcus. And Marcus would have to tell her that not only was the credit card dead, but her luxury SUV was about to be repossessed. I stood up and walked to the window. The city below was bustling. People were rushing, spending, buying, consuming. I thought about Leo, my grandson. I hoped he wasn't watching this. I hoped he was at school away from the toxicity of his parents. Everything I was doing for him. I had to burn down the forest to save the seedling. My phone buzzed again, a text from Jonas the lawyer. Filings complete. Process servers are en route to Preston office. Foreclosure notice has been posted. I typed back a single word. Good. I went to my closet and pulled out a fresh suit, not the old charcoal one I had worn to the dinner. A navy blue bespoke suit with a silk lining. I put on my gold cufflinks. I tied my tie with a perfect Windsor knot. It was time to go to work. I had a board meeting to crash. And I wanted to look my best when I told Preston Walsh that he was working for the bricklayer now. The chaos at Preston Walsh's office that morning was something I could only imagine, but Jonas described it to me with clinical precision. Preston didn't believe the freeze was real. He thought it was a glitch, a computer error, a mistake made by some low-level clerk who didn't understand the magnitude of the Walsh empire. He spent 3 hours screaming at branch managers, threatening to sue everyone from the tellers to the Federal Reserve. He was like a captain on a sinking ship, yelling at the ocean to stop rising. He didn't know yet that I was the ocean. But a cornered animal is dangerous, and Preston was no exception. When he realized he couldn't bully the bank into unlocking his funds, he decided to attack the only target he could reach: me. He couldn't get to my money because he didn't know I had any. So he went after the only currency that actually mattered to me: my family. It started with a phone call around noon. I had just finished reviewing the foreclosure documents for the mansion. I picked up the phone hoping it was Marcus, maybe finally coming to his senses about the car. But it was Brittany. "Thaddeus," she said. Her voice wasn't shrill like it usually was when she was upset. It was cold. It was the voice of someone who had been coached. "Brittany," I said, leaning back in my office chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Dad told me what you did," she said. "He told me you were disrespectful at the party. He told me you threatened him." "I didn't threaten him, Brittany," I said calmly. "I promised him a reality check." "There is a difference. I don't care about your word games," she snapped. "You humiliated us. You ruined Thanksgiving. And now Dad is stressed out of his mind dealing with bank errors because of the bad energy you brought into our house." I almost laughed at that. Bad energy. As if my mood had caused a multi-million-dollar liquidity crisis. "Listen to me closely, Thaddeus," she continued. "We have decided that your influence is toxic. You are bitter. You are jealous of our success, and we don't want that kind of negativity around Leo." My hand froze on the desk. The pen I was holding snapped in half. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I said you are not to see Leo," she said. "Not today, not this weekend, not until we decide you have learned how to behave in polite society. I have already informed the school you are not on the pickup list anymore. If you try to come to the house, we will call the police for trespassing." "Brittany," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "This is between me and your father. Do not bring the boy into this. He is 5 years old. We are supposed to go fishing on Sunday." "Not anymore," she said. "Find another hobby, Thaddeus. Go feed pigeons in the park or whatever old men do. Leave my son alone." She hung up. The silence in my penthouse was deafening. I had lost millions on bad deals in the 80s and never blinked. I had buried my wife and stood by her grave without collapsing. But this, being told I couldn't see my grandson, being told I was a stranger to the boy who had fallen asleep on my chest when he was a baby, that felt like a physical blow. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. For an hour I sat there in the dark. I thought about calling Jonas. I thought about sending the police to their house with a court order, but I knew that would only traumatize Leo. I didn't want him to see his grandfather surrounded by flashing lights and shouting adults. I needed to see him. I needed to know he was okay. I changed out of my suit and put on a baseball cap and a pair of sunglasses. I took the freight elevator down to the garage and bypassed my luxury sedan. Instead, I climbed into my old Ford pickup truck, the one I kept from my contracting days. It was rusted around the wheel wells and the engine rattled, but it was invisible. Nobody looked twice at an old truck in this city. I drove to St. Jude's Academy. It was one of those private schools where the tuition cost more than most people earned in a year. The driveway was lined with imported luxury SUVs. Mothers in yoga pants and oversized sunglasses stood in clusters talking about their ski trips and their charity galas. I parked across the street under the shade of an oak tree. I rolled the window down just a crack. The bell rang at 3 o'clock. A stream of children in navy blue blazers poured out of the brick building. I scanned the faces, my heart hammering in my chest. And then I saw him. Leo. He looked so small in his uniform. His backpack was almost as big as he was. He walked out of the gate holding a piece of paper, probably a drawing he had made in art class. He looked around, scanning the crowd of parents. I saw his face light up for a second when he saw a black SUV, but it wasn't his. His smile faded. He walked over to the designated waiting bench and sat down. I watched as other children were picked up. I saw fathers swinging their sons up into the air. I saw mothers hugging their daughters. One by one, the crowd thinned out. 3:15. Leo was still sitting there. He had put the drawing down on the bench beside him. He was kicking his feet, staring at the cracks in the pavement. 3:30. The teachers were starting to look annoyed. One of them walked over to Leo and said something. He shook his head. My grip on the steering wheel was so tight my knuckles were white. Where were they? Where was Brittany? She had told me I wasn't allowed to pick him up because I was toxic, because I was bad for him. So where was the good parent? Where was the loving mother? I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking app I had installed on the family accounts years ago. I had canceled her credit cards, but I still had access to the location data from the car GPS. The Range Rover was parked at the Sanctuary Spa in downtown. It had been there for 3 hours. She wasn't stuck in traffic. She wasn't working. She was getting a facial. She was lying on a massage table with cucumbers on her eyes while her 5-year-old son sat alone on a wooden bench wondering why nobody wanted him. Rage, unlike anything I had ever felt before, began to boil in my veins. It wasn't the cold, calculated anger I had felt toward Preston. This was hot. This was volcanic. Finally, at 3:45, a beat-up Honda pulled up to the curb. A young woman jumped out looking frazzled. It was the new nanny. I didn't even know her name. They changed nannies every few months because Brittany was impossible to work for. The nanny ran over to Leo. She didn't hug him. She didn't ask how his day was. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the car, talking on her cell phone the entire time. "Come on, Leo, we are late," she was saying into the phone. She didn't even look at him. I watched Leo stumble, trying to keep up with her. He left his drawing on the bench. The wind picked it up and blew it across the parking lot into a puddle. I almost opened the door. I almost ran across the street to grab him, to put him in my truck and drive him far away from these people who treated him like an accessory they could put on a shelf when they were tired of him. But I stopped myself. If I took him now, they would call it kidnapping. Preston would use it to paint me as unstable. They would use their high-priced lawyers to make sure I never saw him again. They would tell Leo that Grandpa was crazy. No, I couldn't save him with a scene. I had to save him with a siege. I watched the Honda drive away, disappearing into the afternoon traffic. I sat there for a long time, staring at the drawing, soaking in the puddle. It was a picture of a house. A big house with a red roof. And 3 stick figures. One was small, one was big, and one was wearing a baseball cap. He had drawn me. He had drawn me next to him. I wiped a single tear from my cheek. Brittany had made a fatal mistake. She thought hurting me would make me back down. She thought using Leo as a weapon would make me surrender my dignity and beg for forgiveness. She didn't understand who I was. I wasn't just fighting for respect anymore. I wasn't just fighting to teach Preston a lesson about arrogance. This was a rescue mission. My grandson was being raised by wolves. Wolves who wore silk and drank champagne, but wolves nonetheless. They were teaching him that he didn't matter. They were teaching him that love was conditional. They were teaching him that appearances were more important than loyalty. If I left him with them, he would grow up to be just like Marcus, weak, fearful, or worse, he would grow up to be like Preston. I started the engine of my truck. The rumble was loud and rough. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jonas again. "Jonas," I said. "Mr. Clay, I assumed you were done for the day. We have already served the papers to Preston." "We are not done," I said, watching the school disappear in my rearview mirror. "We are just getting started. I want you to look into Brittany's background. Deep dive. I want to know everything. I want to know who she talks to. I want to know what she spends her time doing." "We are moving into private investigator territory," Jonas warned. "That is aggressive, Thaddeus." "She kept me from my grandson today, Jonas," I said, my voice flat. "She left him sitting on a bench for 45 minutes while she was at a spa." There was a pause on the line. Jonas had kids too. "Say no more," Jonas said, his tone hardening. "I will put a team on it tonight. If she has a skeleton in her closet, we will find it." And Jonas, "Yes, sir. The foreclosure on the house. Speed it up. Use the clause about property neglect if you have to. I want them out. I want their world to get so small and so uncomfortable that they have no choice but to show their true colors." "Understood." I hung up and drove back toward the city. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the skyline. They wanted to play games with a child's heart. They wanted to use an innocent boy as leverage in a power struggle. Fine. They were about to learn that you never threaten a man who has nothing left to lose but his legacy. I would strip them of everything. Their money, their status, their homes. I would peel away every layer of their artificial lives until there was nothing left but the truth. And when the dust settled, I would be the one standing there to pick up that boy, and I would make sure he never had to wait on a bench alone ever again. The worst kind of thief isn't the one who breaks into your house at night wearing a ski mask. The worst kind of thief is the one who sits at your dinner table, smiles in your face, and plots to steal not just your money, but your very mind. They call it a conservatorship, but I call it what it really is. A slow, legalized murder of a person's freedom. After I left the school that afternoon, my blood was still boiling, but my mind was ice cold. I knew what was coming next. I had been in the construction business for 50 years, and I knew that when a desperate man realizes he cannot bully you, he tries to disqualify you. Preston Walsh was drowning in debt. Brittany was furious about her lifestyle being threatened, and Marcus was too weak to stop them. They needed my money, but they couldn't get it as long as I was the one signing the checks, so they had to take the pen out of my hand. I sat in my penthouse office, the city lights twinkling below me like millions of uncaring eyes. Jonas had sent over a secure file an hour ago. It was a dossier on a man named Dr. Eris Thorne. He was a geriatric psychiatrist with a practice in the suburbs. On paper, he looked respectable. But Jonas had dug deeper. Dr. Thorne had a reputation among certain wealthy families. If you had a troublesome elderly relative who was holding on to the inheritance a little too tightly, Dr. Thorne was the man you called. He was known for diagnosing dementia in people who were perfectly sane and prescribing heavy sedatives that turned sharp minds into oatmeal. Jonas had found 3 emails between Preston and Dr. Thorne. The subject line of the last one read regarding the immediate evaluation of Mr. Clay. They were going to try to declare me incompetent. They were going to say that my recent behavior cutting off the credit cards, repossessing the car, and claiming to own the debt was proof of mental instability. They were going to argue that I was paranoid delusional and a danger to myself. And once they had that diagnosis, they would petition the court for emergency guardianship. They would take control of my assets, my medical decisions, and my life. They would lock me away in a facility while they spent my money on champagne and sports cars. It was a terrifying plan. And if I had been the confused old man they thought I was, it might have worked. But I was Thaddeus Clay. And I never walked onto a job site without checking the blueprints first. My phone rang at 8 o'clock that evening. It was Marcus. I looked at the caller ID and felt a wave of nausea. My own son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The man I had bailed out of trouble more times than I could count. He was part of this. He was going to be the Judas goat leading me to the slaughter. I pressed the record button on my external hard drive, which was linked to my phone line. Then I answered. "Hello, Marcus." "Hey, Dad." His voice was shaky. He sounded like he was reading from a script. "I am glad you picked up, Dad. We have been really worried about you." Worried, I asked, keeping my voice flat. "Why is that?" "Well, you know the way you acted at Thanksgiving. And then taking the car today, and all this stuff about buying Preston debt. It is just really erratic, Dad. It is not like you. You have always been so generous, so calm. Brittany and I were talking, and we think maybe you are under a lot of stress. Maybe you are confused." I closed my eyes for a second, letting the pain wash over me. He was gaslighting me. He was trying to plant the seeds of insanity on a recorded line so they could play it for a judge later. "I am not confused, Marcus," I said. "I know exactly what I am doing. I am protecting my assets from people who do not respect me." "See, that is what I mean," Marcus said quickly, jumping on my words. "You are talking about people not respecting you. You are talking about enemies. That sounds like paranoia, Dad. You are 72. Sometimes as we get older, the chemicals in the brain change. It is nothing to be ashamed of. We just want to help you. Help me by putting me in a home." "No, not a home," Marcus stammered, but I could hear the lie in his throat. "Just a facility where you can get the best care, where you don't have to worry about money or business anymore. We would handle all that for you, so you can relax." I swiveled my chair around to look at the wall where I had pinned up the medical reports from this morning. "Marcus, listen to me." "I am listening, Dad." "Brittany mentioned she knows a doctor, right? A specialist." "Yes, actually she does," Marcus said, sounding relieved that I was taking the bait. "A Dr. Thorne. He is amazing. He is very discreet. We made an appointment for you tomorrow morning at 10, just for a chat. Nothing scary. I can come pick you up." I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had just done. He had just confirmed the trap. "I will not be going to see Dr. Thorne, Marcus. Dad, please. You are being difficult. If you don't go voluntarily, we might have to take other steps. For your own safety. Is that a threat, son?" "It is love, Dad. We love you. We just want you to be safe." I leaned into the microphone, my voice dropping to that deep rumble that used to make foremen tremble on the job site. "Let me tell you about safety, Marcus. Safety is preparation. Do you know what I did yesterday morning before I even canceled your credit cards?" "What?" I went to the university hospital. I saw Dr. Sanderson, the head of neurology. Do you know him? No. He is the best in the state. I underwent a full cognitive battery, 4 hours of tests, MRI scans, blood work, psychological evaluation. I also saw Dr. Liu for a forensic psychiatric assessment. Marcus was silent on the other end. And do you know what they found, Marcus? Dad, They found that my brain is functioning at the level of a man 20 years younger than me. They found zero evidence of dementia, zero evidence of cognitive decline, and certainly no evidence of paranoia. I have the signed affidavits time-stamped and notarized on my desk right now. Dr. Sanderson wrote in his report that I am one of the sharpest individuals he has evaluated this year. I heard Marcus inhale sharply. So you see, son, I continued, my voice hardening. If you try to drag me in front of a judge and claim I am senile, I will present these documents. And then I will present the emails between Preston and Dr. Thorne that my lawyer found. The ones where they discuss sedating me to make me compliant. Marcus gasped. How did you... I told you, Marcus, I am not paranoid. I am informed. There is a difference. Dad, I didn't know about the emails, I swear. Brittany just said Dr. Thorne could help. Ignorance is not a defense. Marcus, I snapped. You were ready to sign my life away. You were ready to declare me incompetent so you could keep driving a Range Rover and living in a mansion you didn't earn. You were going to let them drug your father. Dad, no. I have the recording of this call, Marcus. I have your voice trying to coerce me into a medical exam I don't need. I have the emails, and I have the clean bill of health from the top experts in the country. The line was dead silent. I could hear Marcus breathing shallow, terrified breaths. So here is what is going to happen, I said. You are going to tell Brittany and Preston that the plan is off. You are going to tell them that I am not the prey they thought I was. And if Dr. Thorne or any other quack comes near me, I will have their medical license revoked, and I will sue them for conspiracy to commit fraud. Dad, I am sorry, Marcus whispered, and this time he sounded like he was crying. I am so sorry. They told me it was for the best. You are a grown man, Marcus, I said, and my voice was filled with disappointment, not anger. Stop letting them think for you. I hung up the phone. I stared at the recording device. The red light blinked off. I had the evidence. I had the defense. The legal trap they had set for me had snapped shut, but I wasn't the one caught in it. They were. But as I sat there in the silence of my empty penthouse, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt old. Not senile, just old. And tired. My son had just tried to betray me in the most intimate way possible. He had tried to steal my reality. I poured myself another glass of water. No bourbon tonight. I needed to be sharp. Tomorrow was the shareholder meeting. Tomorrow I would walk into Preston Company not as a confused old man, but as the majority owner of his debt. They wanted a fight about who was in control. Fine. I was about to show them exactly what control looked like. And it wouldn't be a doctor's note signed by a crook. It would be a hostile takeover signed by Iron Clay. The conference room on the top floor of the Walsh construction building was designed to intimidate. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the skyline, a skyline that I had helped build with my own hands 50 years ago. The table was made of imported mahogany long enough to seat 20 men. The chairs were upholstered in Italian leather. Everything about the room screamed power and wealth. But today, the room smelled of fear. I stood in the waiting area just outside the double glass doors watching through the frosted pane. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. Inside the emergency board meeting was already unraveling. I could see the silhouettes of the shareholders. They were agitated. Arms were waving, fingers were pointing, and at the head of the table sat Preston Walsh. Even through the glass, he looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His tie was loosened. His hair, usually plastered into a perfect helmet of gray, was disheveled. He was sweating. I could see him dabbing his forehead with a napkin, trying to hold back the tide of panic that was rising in the room. Beside me stood Jonas, my lawyer. He was checking his watch. "It is time," Mr. Clay Jonas said quietly. "The debt call deadline passed 2 minutes ago. They are officially in default." I nodded. I adjusted the cuffs of my suit. It wasn't the charcoal suit from Thanksgiving. It wasn't the work clothes I wore to the construction sites. This was a bespoke suit cut from midnight blue vicuña wool, tailored in Milan. It cost $5,000. The shoes on my feet were handmade Cordovan leather. I looked every inch the titan of industry that I actually was. "Let us go inside, Jonas," I said. "I think they are waiting for the representative from Blue Collar Holdings." Jonas pushed the heavy doors open. The conversation inside the room died instantly. 20 heads turned toward the door. Preston was in the middle of a sentence. He was shouting something about a banking error, about a conspiracy, but the words died in his throat when he saw me. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic click of my shoes on the polished floor. I walked slowly, deliberately. I didn't look at the shareholders. I kept my eyes locked on Preston. He blinked once, twice, trying to process what he was seeing. He looked at my suit. He looked at the way I carried myself. He looked at the grim determination in my eyes. "What is he doing here?" Preston stammered. Standing up so quickly, his chair rolled back and hit the window with a dull thud. "Security. Someone call security. Get this man out of here. This is a closed meeting." None of the shareholders moved. They were looking at me, then at Jonas, then back at me. They sensed something. They sensed a shift in the gravity of the room. "Sit down, Preston," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was the voice I used when I told a foreman that a foundation was cracked and needed to be poured again. It was a voice that did not invite debate. "You don't give orders here," Preston shouted, his face flushing that familiar shade of angry crimson. "You are a guest, Thaddeus, an unwanted guest. You are trespassing. I don't know how you got past the lobby, but I am going to have you arrested." I reached the end of the table opposite him. I placed my leather portfolio on the mahogany surface. "I am not a guest, Preston," I said, "and I am certainly not trespassing." Jonas stepped forward, opening a thick file folder. "Gentlemen, ladies." Jonas addressed the room, ignoring Preston completely. "My name is Jonas Sterling. I am the lead counsel for Blue Collar Holdings." A murmur went through the room. Blue Collar Holdings was the entity that had paralyzed their accounts. It was the shark circling their boat. And this Jonas continued gesturing to me as the chairman and sole proprietor of Blue Collar Holdings, Mr. Thaddeus Clay. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Preston's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. He looked at me, his eyes bulging. "That is a lie," he whispered. "That is impossible. He is a bricklayer. He is a nobody." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "A bricklayer who knows how to save his money, Preston," I said. "Unlike you." I walked around the side of the table. The shareholders actually pulled their chairs in as I passed, making way for me. They were sharks too, and they knew when a bigger predator had entered the water. I walked all the way to the head of the table where Preston was standing. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and terror. "You are in my seat, Preston," I said softly. He didn't move. He stood there trembling. "Preston, please," Jonas said sharply from the other end of the room. "Do not make us call the marshals. You are no longer the majority shareholder. We can do this with dignity, or we can do it with handcuffs." Preston looked around the room for support. He looked at his old friends, his golf buddies, his business partners, but nobody would meet his eyes. They were all looking at their papers, looking at their phones, looking anywhere but at him. He was radioactive. Slowly, painfully, Preston moved aside. He slumped into the chair next to the head of the table. I sat down. The leather chair creaked as I settled into it. I rested my hands on the table and looked at the faces around me. Then I turned to Preston. He was staring at the table, defeated, but still seething. "Good morning, Preston," I said. He didn't answer. I reached for the pitcher of water in the center of the table. I poured a glass. The sound of the water splashing into the crystal was the only sound in the room. I took a sip. "You know, Preston," I said, setting the glass down, "I have been thinking about our dinner the other night." He flinched. "You served some very expensive bourbon," I continued. 12-year-old Pappy Van Winkle, if I am not mistaken. Smooth. Oaky. A gentleman's drink. I leaned in closer to him. "You told me that a man like me, a man who works with his hands, shouldn't be drinking such fine things. You said I should stick to tap water. You said I should know my place." I paused, letting the memory of the humiliation wash over the room. I wanted the other board members to know exactly what kind of man they had been following. "Well, Preston," I said, "I took your advice. I went back to my place. I went back to my roots, and I checked the foundation of this company. I opened my portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward him. "And do you know what I found?" I asked. "I found rot. I found dry rot in the financials. I found termites in the accounting. I found a company that has been built on debt lies and arrogance." Preston looked at the paper. It was the transfer of ownership document. "You splashed bourbon on me, Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that sent a shiver down the spine of everyone in the room. "You wanted to stain my suit. You wanted to make me dirty." I tapped the paper with my index finger. "So today I am returning the favor, but I am not serving bourbon. That is too rich for a man with 0 assets." I looked him dead in the eye. "Today, Preston, I am inviting you to drink muddy water, because that is all you have left. The well has run dry." Preston looked up at me, tears of rage and impotence welling in his eyes. "You can't do this," he hissed. "This is my company. My name is on the building." "Names can be sandblasted, Preston," I said. I turned my attention to the rest of the board. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Blue Collar Holdings has exercised its right under Clause 13 of the debt agreement. We have converted the outstanding $20 million of debt into equity. I looked around the room, making eye contact with every single person. I now control 51% of Walsh Construction. I am not just a shareholder. I am the owner, I am the chairman, and I am the CEO. Gasps erupted. People started whispering furiously. "This is a hostile takeover," one board member shouted, a man with a red tie. "You can't just walk in here," and I cut him off with a raised hand. "It is not hostile," I said calmly. "It is necessary. This company is bankrupt. You have been bleeding cash for 3 years. You have been paying Preston massive bonuses while the subcontractors go unpaid. I checked the books. You haven't paid the framing crew on the downtown project in 2 months. I stood up and walked over to the window looking out at the city. "I was a framer," once I said with my back to them. "I know what it feels like to go home on a Friday with empty pockets because the boss needed a new boat." I turned back to face them. "That ends today." I looked at Preston. "Preston Walsh, you are hereby removed as CEO effective immediately. Your access to company accounts is revoked. Your company car is to be returned to the garage by noon, and your security clearance is suspended." Preston's face turned white. "You are firing me," he whispered, "from my own company." "No," I said. "I am not firing you. That would be too easy, and frankly, you owe this company too much money to just walk away." I smiled again, and this time it terrified him. "I am demoting you." "Demoting me?" Preston sputtered. "To what? Vice president? Consultant?" "No," I said. I walked over to the corner of the room where a hard hat and a yellow safety vest were hanging on a rack, props they used for photo ops. I grabbed them and tossed them onto the mahogany table in front of Preston. They slid across the polished wood and stopped right under his nose. "Site supervisor," I said. The room went deadly silent. "We have a project in the marshlands," I said. "The affordable housing complex you have been ignoring. The ground is unstable. It is muddy. It is dirty work. The kind of work you think is beneath you." I leaned both hands on the table, looming over him. "You start tomorrow at 6 a.m. You will report to the foreman. You will wear boots. You will walk through the mud. And you will learn exactly how hard it is to make $1 in this world." "I am not doing that," Preston screamed, standing up. "I will not be humiliated like this. I quit." "If you quit," Jonas interjected smoothly from the side of the room, "we will enforce the personal guarantee clause. We will seize your private residence, your vacation home, and your pension. You will be left with nothing, not even a sleeping bag." Preston froze. He looked at Jonas, then at me. He was trapped. However, Jonas continued, "If you accept the position of site supervisor, we will defer the seizure of your primary residence. You will have a salary, minimum wage, of course, but it is a job." I watched the fight drain out of Preston Walsh. His shoulders slumped. He looked at the yellow vest on the table, the symbol of the working class he despised. He had a choice: lose everything and live on the street, or work for the man he had called a worthless buzzard. I checked my watch. "You have 5 minutes to decide, Preston," I said. "And then I have a company to run. I have to make sure the framers get paid." I sat back in the chairman's chair and waited. Preston reached out with a trembling hand. He touched the plastic hard hat. He looked at me one last time, hoping for mercy. He found none. He picked up the hat. I will be there at 6, he whispered. "Good," I said. "Don't be late. We don't pay for travel time." I turned to the rest of the board, who were looking at me with newfound respect and fear. Now, gentlemen, I said, opening my portfolio, let us talk about the future, and let us get one thing straight. From now on, nobody in this company drinks bourbon until the job is done. I looked at Preston one last time, and even then I added, we pay for our own drinks. Preston hung his head. The takeover was complete. The bricklayer had just bought the castle, and the king was now the servant. The silence in the boardroom was heavy enough to crush a man's soul, but Preston Walsh was too busy trying to salvage his ego to notice. He stood there staring at the yellow safety vest and the battered white hard hat I had tossed onto the mahogany table. To him, those items were trash. They were symbols of the people he stepped on to get to the top. To me, they were the crown jewels of honest labor. He looked up at me, his face a mask of disbelief and sputtering indignation. His hands were shaking not from fear anymore, but from the sheer audacity of what I was proposing. You cannot be serious, Thaddeus, he said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. I built this company. I am not going to put on a costume and play in the dirt like a child. I am 60 years old. I have high blood pressure. I have a reputation. I sat back in the leather chair that used to be his and crossed my legs. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The power in the room had shifted entirely to my side of the table. Reputation is a funny thing, Preston, I said calmly. It takes a lifetime to build and about 5 minutes to destroy. And right now your reputation is hanging by a very thin thread. I signaled to Jonas. My lawyer reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick binder. It wasn't the debt restructuring paperwork. This was something else. This was the result of a forensic audit I had commissioned 3 weeks ago when I first started sniffing around the company books. Jonas slid the binder across the table. It stopped right next to the hard hat. What is this? Preston asked, looking at the black cover as if it were a bomb. Open it, I said. Turn to page 42. Preston hesitated. He looked around the room at the other board members, but they were all looking at their shoes or studying the ceiling tiles. They knew a slaughter when they saw one, and they didn't want to get splattered with the blood. Preston opened the binder. He flipped the pages, his fingers fumbling. When he reached page 42, he stopped. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in an expensive suit. I see you recognize the names of those shell companies, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Phantom Subcontractors, Inc., Apex Consulting, Riverfront Logistics. Preston swallowed hard. I don't know what you are talking about, he whispered, but he couldn't meet my eyes. Don't insult my intelligence, Preston, I snapped. Those companies don't exist. They have no employees, no equipment, no offices. The only thing they have are bank accounts that you control. You have been billing your own company for services that were never rendered. You have been siphoning off millions of dollars meant for concrete and steel and putting it into your offshore accounts while your workers went without safety gear. The room gasped. Embezzlement was one thing. Stealing from the safety budget was another. That is an accounting error, Preston stammered, closing the binder quickly as if hiding the page would make the truth disappear. It is grand larceny, I corrected him. It is fraud. And it is a federal crime that carries a minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. So here is the choice, Preston, and it is the only choice you are going to get. Option A is simple. I hand this binder to the district attorney. You go to prison. You lose your house, your pension, your freedom, and you spend the rest of your life sharing a cell with a man named Bubba. Preston flinched. Or, I continued, pointing a finger at the yellow vest. Option B. You work it off. You put on that vest. You put on that hat. And you go down to the Marshlands project. We are 3 weeks behind schedule because you fired the last crew to save money. You are going to be the site supervisor. And when I say supervisor, I don't mean sitting in a trailer drinking coffee. I mean you are going to be in the mud. You are going to carry lumber. You are going to climb scaffolding. You are going to understand exactly what it feels like to break your back for a paycheck. Preston looked at the vest, then at the binder. He looked at the door as if thinking about running. I have bad knees, he whimpered. Prison floors are concrete, Preston, I said, cold as ice. And the beds are steel. Your knees won't like it there either. He stood there for a long, agonizing minute. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Finally, his shoulders slumped. The arrogance evaporated, leaving only a defeated, broken old man. "Fine," he whispered. "I will do it, but only for a few weeks, until I can find another investor." I didn't bother telling him that no investor in their right mind would touch him now. I just nodded. "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. The crew doesn't like waiting." The next morning the sky was a bruised purple color over the marshlands. It was a miserable stretch of land near the river where the city was trying to build affordable housing. The ground was soft and wet constantly, threatening to swallow the heavy machinery. It smelled of stagnant water and diesel fumes. I sat in the cab of my old pickup truck, sipping a thermos of black coffee. The heater was humming, trying to fight off the biting dawn chill. At 5:55, a silver Mercedes pulled up to the muddy entrance of the site. It was Preston's car. It looked ridiculous here, gleaming and pristine against the backdrop of excavators and piles of rebar. Preston stepped out. I almost choked on my coffee. He was wearing designer jeans that probably cost $300. He had on a pair of pristine Timberland boots that looked like they had never seen a speck of dust, let alone mud. And he was wearing a cashmere sweater under the yellow safety vest. He looked like a model in a catalog for people who pretend to work. He stood by his car looking down at the ankle-deep mud that separated him from the trailer. He took a hesitant step. His expensive boots sank with a wet squelch. He pulled it out, grimacing. I rolled down my window. "Good morning, sunshine," I shouted. Preston jumped. He looked over at my truck. His eyes were puffy. He clearly hadn't slept. "This is inhumane." "Thaddeus," he yelled back, wrapping his arms around himself against the wind. "It is freezing out here." "It is work, Preston," I said. "Get moving. The foreman is waiting for you by the framing station." Preston trudged through the mud, slipping and sliding. By the time he reached the trailer, his designer jeans were splattered up to the knees. I got out of my truck and followed him. I wanted a front row seat to this. Standing by the stack of lumber was Jerome. Jerome was the lead framer. He was a mountain of a man, black, 6'4", with arms like tree trunks. He had been working for me since he was 18. He knew the business better than any architect, and he was one of the men Preston had called lazy in a board meeting 3 months ago. Jerome was holding a clipboard checking off inventory. He saw Preston approaching and didn't even look up. "You are late, rookie." Jerome rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly. "I am not a rookie," Preston snapped, trying to summon some of his old authority. "I am Preston Walsh. I used to own this company. I am the site supervisor." Jerome looked up then. He looked Preston up and down, taking in the cashmere sweater and the terrified expression. He spat on the ground near Preston's boot. "I don't care if you are the king of England," Jerome said. "On this site, you are the gopher. Go for this, go for that, and right now I need 40 sheets of 3/4-inch plywood moved from that truck to the second floor." Preston's jaw dropped. "You want me to carry plywood?" he asked incredulously. "That is manual labor. That is not supervision." "We are short-handed," Jerome said, stepping closer to Preston, forcing the smaller man to look up. "Because someone cut the budget. So unless you want to explain to Mr. Clay why we are behind schedule, you better start lifting." Preston looked at me, standing a few feet away. I just took a sip of my coffee and checked my watch. "You heard the man, Preston," I said. "Lift with your knees, not your back." For the next 4 hours, I watched a man unravel. Preston Walsh had never done a day of physical labor in his life. The first sheet of plywood almost tipped him over. He struggled under the weight, his face turning beet red, his breath coming in wheezing gasps. He wobbled across the muddy ground, his fancy boots slipping with every step. The other workers, all of them men he had looked down on for years, stopped to watch. They didn't jeer. They didn't laugh. They just watched with that silent, judgmental stare of men who know what real work looks like. "Hey, watch the corners!" Preston Jerome yelled from the scaffolding above. "You chip that wood, it comes out of your paycheck." Preston gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold. He dragged the wood up the makeshift ramp. He slipped once, falling onto his knees in the muck. His cashmere sweater was ruined. His hands were already blistering because he hadn't brought gloves. I walked over to where he was kneeling in the dirt. He was panting, clutching his chest. I can't do this," he wheezed, looking up at me. "I am going to have a heart attack." "You are not going to have a heart attack, Preston," I said, looking down at him. That is just weakness leaving the body. You know, when I was 22, I carried twice this weight for half the pay you are getting, and I didn't have a Mercedes to drive home in. This is torture, he spat, trying to wipe the mud from his face but only smearing it further. You are enjoying this. You are a sadist. I crouched down so I was eye level with him. I am not enjoying this, Preston. It actually pains me to see how soft you are. But this isn't torture. This is restitution. Every drop of sweat that falls off your forehead is a penny you stole from this company. You have a long way to go before you break even. I stood up. Jerome, I called out. Yeah, boss, Jerome answered from the roof. Mr. Walsh here says he needs a break, I said loud enough for the whole crew to hear. He thinks the work is too hard. Jerome laughed, a booming sound that echoed across the site. Too hard, he shouted back. My 12-year-old daughter moves lumber faster than him. Tell him if he doesn't get that wood up here in 10 minutes, he can go explain it to the bank. Preston looked at Jerome, then at me. He saw no pity. He saw only the consequences of his own actions. He groaned a sound of pure misery and forced himself to stand up. His legs were shaking. He grabbed the plywood again, his manicured fingernails digging into the rough wood. I walked back to my truck. I had other business to attend to. I had to deal with Brittany and the school, but I took one last look in the rearview mirror as I drove away. Preston Walsh, the man who had splashed bourbon in my face because he thought he was superior, was currently face down in the mud, struggling to lift a piece of wood that the men he despised carried like it was paper. He was finally learning his place, and it was right at the bottom where he belonged. The humiliation was complete, but the war was far from over. As I drove away, I pulled out the dossier on Brittany. Preston was broken. Now it was time to shatter his daughter. Desperation is a dangerous thing. It makes people irrational. It makes them sloppy. And when a woman like Brittany Walsh feels the walls closing in, she does not reflect on her actions. She lashes out. She looks for the quickest way to regain the feeling of power she has lost. I knew she had gone to the construction site. One of my foremen told me a silver Range Rover had pulled up to the perimeter fence around noon. She had stood there in her designer heels, clutching her handbag, watching her father Preston stumble through the mud with a stack of plywood on his shoulder. She didn't go help him. She didn't bring him water. She just watched him with a look of pure horror. Not because she loved him, but because seeing him like that shattered her illusion of invincibility. If Preston Walsh could fall, then Brittany Walsh could fall too, and that terrified her. I was sitting in my office at the penthouse late that afternoon reviewing the safety reports from the Marshlands project. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and blood orange. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually precedes a storm. My computer let out a soft ping. It was a notification from an auction house aggregator. I had set up alerts years ago for specific keywords: Clay Construction, Walsh Enterprises, and a few more personal terms related to my private collection of assets. I clicked the notification expecting it to be a piece of art or maybe some antique furniture I had been eyeing. The browser window opened, and my heart stopped beating. For a full 10 seconds I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the screen, my hands trembling, not with age but with a rage so profound it felt like I had swallowed a live coal. There on the screen in high definition was a necklace. It wasn't just any necklace. It was a vintage sapphire pendant surrounded by a halo of marquee-cut diamonds on a white gold chain. The listing title read, Vintage Art Deco Sapphire Necklace. Rare. Urgent sale. Buy it now. Price $25,000. I knew that necklace. I knew every facet of every stone. I knew the weight of it in my hand. I bought that necklace for Lucille in 1985. We had been married for 20 years. I had just landed my first major skyscraper contract. We were finally breathing easy financially. I took her to a jeweler in New York and told her to pick out anything she wanted. She chose the sapphires because she said they matched the color of the ocean where we spent our honeymoon. She wore that necklace to every major event of our lives. She wore it when Marcus graduated from college. She wore it at our 40th anniversary. And she was wearing it in the last photo I ever took of her before the cancer stole her from me. When Lucille passed away, I put the necklace in the family safe. I couldn't bear to look at it. It hurt too much. 5 years ago, on the morning of Marcus and Brittany's wedding, Marcus came to me. He begged me to let Brittany wear it. He said it would mean so much to her to have a piece of mom walking down the aisle with her. He said it would be a symbol of her joining the family. I hesitated. My gut told me no. My gut told me that a woman like Brittany wouldn't understand the sanctity of that object, but I loved my son, and I wanted to believe that he had chosen a good woman. So I agreed. I loaned it to her. I told her explicitly that it was a loan, that it remained part of the Clay family trust and was to be returned to the safe after the honeymoon. She never returned it. Every time I asked, she had an excuse. It was at the cleaners. It was in a safety deposit box. She forgot the key. Eventually, I stopped asking because I didn't want to cause friction in my son's marriage. I let it go, but I never gave her title to it, and now here it was, on a public auction site, being peddled like a piece of costume jewelry to pay for her facials and her credit card bills. She wasn't just selling metal and stone, she was selling my memories. She was pawning the ghost of my wife. I slammed my fist onto the desk so hard my coffee cup jumped and spilled brown liquid over my papers. "You crossed the line, Brittany," I whispered to the empty room. "You can spit on me. You can steal my money. You can isolate my grandson. But you do not touch Lucille." I grabbed my phone and dialed Jonas. Thaddeus Jonas answered immediately. "It is late. Is everything all right?" "No," I growled. "It is not all right. Open your email." I just forwarded you a link. I heard the clicking of keys on the other end. Then a sharp intake of breath. Is that Lucille's necklace?" Jonas asked softly. He knew. He had been at the funeral. He knew what that necklace meant. "Yes," I said. "She listed it an hour ago, under a pseudonym, but the location is her zip code. This is conversion of assets." Jonas said, his voice shifting into lawyer mode. "That jewelry is listed in the schedule of the family trust. She has no legal right to sell it. This is theft, Thaddeus. Grand larceny given the value." "I know what it is," I said. "But if I report it stolen now, the police will seize it as evidence. It will sit in an impound locker for months or years while the case drags through the courts. I cannot have Lucille's necklace sitting in a dirty police locker." "So what do you want to do?" Jonas asked. "I want to buy it," I said. "Buy it back?" Jonas asked. "But Thaddeus, that is $25,000. You are paying for your own property." "I don't care about the money," I snapped. "I care about securing the asset. I want that necklace in my hands tonight. And once I have it, once I have the receipt and the proof of transaction, then we drop the hammer." I see, Jonas said slowly. "You want to catch her in the act of completing the fraud?" "Exactly. Set up a proxy account. Do not use my name. Use a generic LLC. Buy it now. Pay the full asking price. And arrange for immediate courier pickup. Tell her the buyer is a collector who wants it tonight." "Consider it done," Jonas said. "And Thaddeus." "What?" "We will get her for this. This isn't just a financial crime. This is personal." I hung up and turned back to the screen. I watched as the listing status changed from active to sold. I sat back in my chair, my chest heaving. I felt sick, physically sick. To think of her hands touching that necklace. To think of her taking photos of it, probably laying it out on her bedspread, calculating how much cash she could get for it. It was an act of violation. She probably thought she was so smart. She probably thought the old man would never know. She probably thought I was too busy mourning my lost relationship with my grandson to notice her liquidating the family heirlooms. She had forgotten one thing. I built my empire by paying attention to the details. 2 hours later, a courier arrived at the concierge desk of my building. He was carrying a small velvet pouch. I signed for it. My hands were shaking again. I took the elevator up to the penthouse. I sat down at my desk and turned on the heavy brass lamp. I opened the pouch. There it was. The sapphires sparkled in the lamplight, deep and blue and endless. I picked it up. It felt cold. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I could smell Lucille's perfume. I could hear her laugh. I could feel the warmth of her skin. I held the necklace to my chest and wept. I cried for the woman I missed. I cried for the son I had lost to a viper. And I cried for the sheer ugliness of greed. But the tears didn't last long. They dried up and were replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I placed the necklace gently into my personal safe and spun the dial. Then I opened my laptop again. I typed an email to Jonas. "Subject Operation Scorched Earth. Body, I have the item. The chain of custody is preserved. Prepare the criminal complaint. I want her charged with grand larceny by conversion and wire fraud since she used the internet to facilitate the sale. Do not file it yet. Wait for my signal. I want this to be the final nail in the coffin." I hit send. Brittany had made a calculation. She thought the $25,000 would solve her problems. She thought it would give her breathing room. She thought it would buy her time to figure out how to destroy me. She was wrong. That $25,000 wasn't a lifeline. It was bait. And she had swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Dad," he said, sounding panicked. "Have you seen Brittany? She is not home. She said she was going out to meet a friend, but she's been gone for hours." And she took the spare key to the safe in the bedroom. I leaned back in my chair watching the city lights. "I don't know where your wife is, Marcus," I said calmly. "But I suggest you check the bank account. I have a feeling she just came into some money." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "Ask her about your mother's necklace," I said. "Ask her where it is." "Dad, the necklace is in the safety deposit box. Brittany told me she put it there last month." "Go look, Marcus. Go look in the box." I hung up. I knew what was coming. I knew the scream that would echo through that house when he realized the box was empty. I knew the lie she would tell him when she got home. She would say she lost it. She would say it was stolen. She would say anything to cover her tracks. But it didn't matter what she said, because I had the receipt. And soon, very soon, I would hand that receipt to a detective. Brittany Walsh had wanted a war. She had attacked my dignity. She had attacked my relationship with my grandson. But tonight she had attacked the memory of the only woman I ever loved. And for that, there would be no mercy. There would be no settlement. There would be only justice. Cold, hard, and absolute. There is a difference between a house and a home. A house is just wood, brick, concrete, and glass. It is an asset. It sits on a balance sheet. A home is something you build with love, with memories, and with respect. My son Marcus and his wife Brittany lived in a house. A magnificent, sprawling 5-bedroom Mediterranean-style villa in the most exclusive gated community in the city. It had marble floors, a chef's kitchen, a swimming pool with a waterfall, and a 3-car garage. But it was not their home. It was my asset. I bought the land 10 years ago. I hired the architects. I approved the blueprints. And I paid for every single nail that went into the structure. When Marcus got married, I let them move in. There was no lease, no rent. Just a handshake and a father's wish to see his son start his life on a solid foundation. I told them they could live there as long as they maintained the property and treated the family with respect. It was a verbal contract based on trust, but contracts based on trust are only as good as the people who sign them. And after Brittany sold my wife's necklace, that contract was null and void. She had violated the sanctity of our family history, so I was going to violate the sanctity of her comfort. Evicting a family member is messy. It takes months. There are tenant protection laws, hearings, and delays. Brittany knew this. She probably thought that even if I was angry, she could squat in that mansion for a year while the lawyers fought it out. She thought she had time. She forgot that I am a builder, and a builder has the right to maintain his property, especially when he deems it structurally unsafe. It was 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. The sun was just starting to burn off the mist that clung to the manicured lawns of the neighborhood. It was the time of day when the wealthy residents were usually asleep or sipping their first espresso. I sat in the cab of a heavy-duty excavator. Behind me, a convoy of 3 dump trucks and a crew of 20 men in orange vests and hard hats idled their engines. The rumble of the diesel motors was a deep guttural growl that shattered the pristine silence of the suburb. I picked up the radio. "Move in," I said. The convoy rolled forward. We didn't stop at the driveway. The iron gate, an intricate piece of custom work that Brittany loved to pose in front of for her social media photos, was closed. My foreman, a man named Big Mike, who had been with me for 30 years, looked at me for the signal. I nodded. Mike revved the engine of the truck. He didn't ram the gate. We were professionals. 2 men jumped out with plasma cutters. Sparks flew in the early morning light, a shower of orange against the gray steel. Within 3 minutes, the hinges were sliced through. The heavy iron gates groaned and fell inward with a crash that sounded like a bomb going off. We were in. I drove the lead truck right up to the front lawn. I didn't stick to the driveway. I rolled the massive tires over the pristine emerald grass that Brittany spent thousands of dollars a month maintaining. I crushed the flower beds. I flattened the imported rose bushes. I parked the excavator 3 feet from the front door, the metal bucket looming over the porch like a giant mechanical fist. The front door flew open. Brittany came running out. She was wearing a silk robe and matching eye mask pushed up on her forehead. Her face was a mask of sheer terror and confusion. Marcus was right behind her wearing boxer shorts and a t-shirt looking like he had just seen a ghost. "What is happening?" Brittany screamed, her voice shrill enough to break glass. "Who are you people? Get off my lawn!" I stepped out of the truck. I was wearing my hard hat and holding a clipboard. I walked up the path, stepping over the crushed remains of her hydrangeas. "Good morning, Brittany," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the idling engines. "Thaddeus," she shrieked. "Are you insane? You just destroyed the gate. You drove a truck onto the lawn. Call the police, Marcus. Call them right now." Marcus fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. "Go ahead, Marcus," I said calmly. "Call them. In fact, I already called them. They should be here any minute to assist with traffic control." "Traffic control," Brittany yelled. "This is vandalism. You are destroying my house." I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her. "Correction. Brittany, I am renovating my house." I held up the clipboard. "This is a notice of emergency structural repair," I announced loud enough for the neighbors who were starting to peek out of their windows to hear. "As the owner of record, I have identified several critical safety hazards in this property. The wiring is outdated, the plumbing is suspect, and the foundation... Well, the foundation is completely rotten." "That is a lie," Brittany screamed. "This house is 5 years old. It is perfect." I shook my head sadly. "You can never be too careful with safety, my dear. As the landlord, I have a legal obligation to ensure the property is up to code, and right now, in my professional opinion, this house is uninhabitable." I signaled to Big Mike. "Cut the water," I shouted. One of the crew members marched over to the main water valve near the street. He had a wrench the size of a baseball bat. With 2 hard turns, he shut off the supply. "Cut the power," I ordered. Another man went to the breaker box on the side of the house. He yanked the main fuse. The lights inside the house went black. The hum of the refrigerator died. The pool pump silenced. Brittany stood there, her mouth gaping open. "You can't do this. We live here. We have rights. You have the right to live in a safe structure," I said. "And since this structure is currently a construction zone, I am afraid I have to ask you to vacate the premises for your own safety. Hard hats are required beyond this point." Marcus finally found his voice. "Dad, stop this. Please. You are making a scene. Everyone is watching." I looked at my son. He looked pathetic. A grown man hiding behind his wife's robe while his father dismantled his life. "I am not making a scene, Marcus. I am doing maintenance. You know how I am about maintenance. If you neglect something for too long, it rots. You neglected your relationship with your father. You neglected your duty as a son. And you neglected to return my wife's necklace. Now I am fixing the rot." Just then, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out looking wary of the heavy machinery. Officer Brittany screamed, running down the steps. "Arrest him. He is destroying our home. He is trespassing." The older officer walked up to me. He recognized me. We had worked together on a charity drive for the police precinct a few years back. "Mr. Clay," the officer asked, confused. "What is going on here?" "Good morning, Officer Miller," I said, handing him the clipboard. "I am the owner of this property. Here is the deed, here is the title, and here is the permit for emergency demolition and repair filed with the city this morning." The officer looked at the papers. He checked the address. He checked the names. He looked at Brittany. "Ma'am, is your name on the deed?" he asked. "Well, no," she stammered. "But we live here. We have lived here for 5 years." "Do you have a lease?" the officer asked. "A rental agreement?" "No, he is my father-in-law. We don't need a lease." The officer sighed. He handed the clipboard back to me. "Ma'am, if there is no lease and he is the owner, he has the right to conduct repairs on his property. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. Unless he physically harms you, there is nothing I can do." "But he cut the water," she cried. "He cut the power," I stepped in. "The electrical system is a fire hazard, officer, and the pipes are leaking into the soil. I couldn't, in good conscience, let them stay in a death trap. I am a responsible landlord." The officer nodded. He knew exactly what I was doing. He saw the look in my eyes. He saw the pain and the resolve. "It checks out," the officer said to Brittany. "I suggest you let Mr. Clay do his work. If you have a problem with it, you can take it up in housing court on Monday." "Monday," Brittany shrieked. "It is Saturday. Where are we supposed to sleep? Where are we supposed to go?" "I don't know," I said, turning back to face her. "Maybe you can go to a hotel. Oh, wait, your credit cards don't work." I turned to Big Mike. Mike, the front door looks crooked to me. It doesn't sit right in the frame. Better take it off. Take it off? Mike asked, suppressing a grin. Take it off, I commanded. Take the windows too. We need to let the house breathe. We need to air out the stench of betrayal. The crew moved in with cordless drills and crowbars. Brittany and Marcus stood on the lawn, shivering in the morning chill, watching as my men dismantled their sanctuary piece by piece. They watched as the solid oak front door was unhinged and carried away to the dump truck. They watched as the window panes were removed, leaving the house looking like a skull with empty eye sockets. Within an hour, the house was a shell. No water, no electricity, no front door, no privacy. The wind blew through the foyer, carrying dead leaves onto the marble floor where they had hosted their cocktail parties. I stood by the excavator watching them huddle together. They looked like refugees. And in a way they were. They were refugees from the reality they had tried to ignore. Dad, Marcus said, walking over to me. His voice was broken. Why? Why are you doing this? We can give the money back. I will get a loan. Just stop. It is not about the money, Marcus. I said, my voice low and hard. It never was. It is about the entitlement. You thought this house was your birthright. You thought my labor was your cushion. You forgot that the only thing that separates you from the cold is my goodwill, and you squandered it. I climbed back into the cab of the excavator. I am leaving a security guard here, I said through the window. To protect my tools, not to protect you. If you want to sleep inside, be my guest. But it is going to get cold tonight, and there is no front door to keep the wolves out. I fired up the engine. Where are we supposed to go? Marcus pleaded, tears streaming down his face. I looked at him, then at Brittany, who was sobbing into her hands. I heard the Motel 6 on the highway has vacancies, I said. It is cheap. And they leave the light on for you, which is good because you don't have any lights here. I signaled the convoy to move out. As we rolled away, leaving deep tire tracks in the ruined lawn, I looked back one last time. The mansion stood open and vulnerable, stripped of its defenses. It was no longer a castle, it was just a pile of bricks. And the people standing in front of it were finally, for the first time in their lives, exposed to the elements. I didn't feel happy, I didn't feel joy, but I felt a sense of order returning to the universe. Gravity was working again. What goes up must come down, and they had been up in the clouds for far too long. The neon sign of the Motel 6 flickered outside the window, casting a rhythmic red glow across the cheap polyester bedspread. It was 3 a.m, but nobody in room 112 was sleeping. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner, a scent that was a far cry from the lavender and eucalyptus diffusers that used to scent the air of the mansion. My son Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. In the corner on a rollaway cot, my grandson Leo was curled up in a ball, whimpering in his sleep. The trauma of the eviction, the shouting, and the sight of his home being dismantled had given him nightmares. And then there was Brittany. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by her Louis Vuitton luggage. She wasn't comforting her son. She wasn't talking to her husband. She was frantically polishing a scuff mark on her Birkin bag with a wet washcloth. "Look at this," she hissed, holding the bag up to the flickering light. "That animal in the orange vest scratched the leather when he threw my things on the lawn. This bag cost $12,000, Marcus. Do you hear me? $12,000. Marcus looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. "Brittany," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Leo is crying. He is fine," Brittany snapped, not even looking at the boy. "He is just dreaming. But this leather is ruined. We have to sue your father, Marcus. We have to sue him for property damage, emotional distress, everything." Marcus looked at his wife, really looked at her. For 5 years he had looked at her through a lens of adoration and gratitude. He was the lucky guy who had landed the prom queen. He was the quiet boy who had married the golden girl. But in the harsh red light of that motel room, the filter dropped. He didn't see a golden girl. He saw a woman who was more concerned about a piece of cowhide than the tears of her own child. "I am not suing my father," Brittany, Marcus said quietly. She stopped scrubbing. She turned her head slowly, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dangerously low. "You will do exactly what I tell you to do. Your father humiliated us. He put us in this dump. You are going to fix this, Marcus. You are going to go to him tomorrow and demand our house back, or I swear to God I will leave you and take Leo with me." Marcus flinched. That was her trump card. She always played it. At that moment, Marcus' phone buzzed on the nightstand. He picked it up. A single text message. From Thaddeus Clay. Meet me at the old shipyard. Warehouse 4. Alone. Now. Marcus looked at Brittany. She had already gone back to scrubbing her bag, muttering curses under her breath. I have to go out, Marcus said, standing up and grabbing his keys. Where are you going? Brittany demanded. To get us breakfast. Get me a latte, soy milk. And don't get the cheap stuff. I am going for a walk, Marcus lied. He walked out into the cold night air. The rain had started to fall, mixing with the grime of the city streets. He got into the rental car, a cheap, compact sedan that smelled of wet dog, and drove toward the docks. The shipyard was where it all began. Before the skyscrapers, before the empire, I had started here. Unloading cargo, mixing cement. It was a place of ghosts and grit. I was waiting for him inside the warehouse, standing under a single hanging bulb that swayed gently in the draft. I was wearing my old work coat, the canvas stained with oil and paint. On the metal table in front of me sat a thick manila envelope. Marcus walked in. He looked broken. His shoulders were slumped. His clothes were wrinkled. And he had the look of a man who had forgotten who he was. Dad, he said, his voice echoing in the vast empty space. I don't have the money. If you brought me here to yell at me about the lease, just save it. I can't take any more. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. Sit down, son, I said, pointing to a metal folding chair. Marcus sat. He looked at the envelope. What is that? He asked. Is that the lawsuit? Brittany said you were going to sue us for the jewelry. We will get to the jewelry later, I said. Right now, we need to talk about you. Me. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. There is no me, Dad. I am just a disappointment, I know that. I am the weak link, the son who couldn't fill his father's boots. You are not weak, Marcus, I said sternly. You are blind. There is a difference. I reached out and placed my hand on the envelope. You think you are fighting for your family, Marcus. You think standing by Brittany's side makes you a loyal husband. You think tolerating her abuse makes you a good man. She is my wife, Dad, Marcus said defensively. Through sickness and health, right? Is she your wife, I asked? Or are you her sponsor? Marcus' jaw tightened. Don't start with that, Dad. She loves me. She is just high maintenance. She grew up different. I opened the envelope. I pulled out a stack of photographs, high resolution, taken over the last 6 months. I slid the first one across the table. It was a picture of Brittany. She was at a restaurant, not just any restaurant. The finest steakhouse in the city. She was wearing the sapphire necklace, the one she said was stolen, and sitting across from her holding her hand was a man. He was white, blonde, muscular. He looked like a model from a fitness magazine. He was younger than Marcus, fit, traditionally handsome in the way Preston Walsh would approve of. Marcus stared at the photo. His breath hitched. Who is that? He whispered. His name is Chad, I said calmly. He is her personal trainer, or at least that is what she tells you on the invoices I pay. I slid the next photo across. It was Chad and Brittany in the front seat of her Range Rover. They were kissing. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was passionate, possessive. Her hand was in his hair. And the next photo, Brittany and Chad walking into a hotel. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. The same weekend, Brittany told Marcus she was going to a yoga retreat in Sedona. Marcus didn't speak. He couldn't. He was trembling so hard the table shook. She said she was meditating. He choked out, tears streaming down his face. She was meditating. All right, I said, my voice hard. She was meditating on how to spend my money on another man. I pulled out a sheet of paper. It was a transcript of text messages recovered from her cloud account. Jonas's investigators were thorough. Read the highlighted parts, Marcus, I commanded. Marcus picked up the paper. His eyes scanned the lines. Chad. When are you going to leave him, babe? I am tired of sneaking around. Brittany, be patient, handsome. The old man is going to kick the bucket soon. Once the inheritance clears, I will divorce Marcus and we will have everything. Chad, I hate seeing you with him. Brittany, don't worry about him. He is pathetic. He is just my ATM. He does whatever I say. He is so desperate for me to love him, he doesn't see anything. Plus, he is You know, he is boring. He is not like us. Marcus dropped the paper as if it were burning his fingers. Not like us, he whispered. What does she mean? I leaned forward into the light. My face was grim, my eyes burning with the fire of 1,000 ancestors who had fought for dignity. You know exactly what she means, Marcus. I stood up and walked around the table standing behind him. She means you, our Black Marcus. She means that no matter how much money you have, no matter how many degrees you earn, no matter how many times you bail her father out of debt to her and her family, you will always be the help. You will always be the outsider. I pointed at the photo of the blonde man. That is who she wants, Marcus. Someone who looks like her. Someone who fits into her country club world without people whispering. She married you for the credit card, but she sleeps with him for the status. Marcus put his head on the table and sobbed. It was a guttural, ugly sound, the sound of a man's heart breaking into a million pieces. I let him cry. He needed to cry. He needed to wash away the years of denial. After a few minutes, I placed a hand on his shoulder. It was heavy and firm. I didn't bring you here to hurt you, son. I brought you here to wake you up. I walked back to my side of the table and sat down. You have a choice to make tonight, Marcus, and it is the most important choice of your life. I pointed to the door of the warehouse. You can walk out that door. You can go back to the Motel 6. You can forgive her. You can pretend you didn't see these photos. You can keep being her ATM. You can keep apologizing for your existence. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a growl. Or you can stand up. Marcus lifted his head. His eyes were swollen, but the fear was gone, replaced by something else, pain and anger. She called me her ATM, he whispered. She called you worse than that behind your back, I said. She called you a dog, a pet. I slammed my hand on the table, making him jump. Look at me, Marcus. He looked at me. I built this empire from the mud. I faced men who wanted to lynch me. I faced banks that wouldn't give me a loan because of my skin color. I fought for every inch of respect I have. Did I do all that so my son could be a doormat for a woman who despises his DNA? No, Dad, Marcus whispered. Then choose. I roared, my voice filling the warehouse. Choose right now, Marcus. Do you want to be a self-respecting black man who walks with his head high? Or do you want to be a watchdog for a woman who keeps you on a leash and laughs at you when you are not looking? Marcus stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor. He looked at the photos one last time. He looked at the image of his wife kissing another man. He looked at the text messages calling him pathetic. He wiped his face with his sleeve. May I keep these? He asked, pointing to the photos. They are yours, I said. Marcus gathered the photos and the transcripts. He put them back in the envelope. He held it tight like a weapon. I am going back to the motel, he said, to do what I asked, to pack my things, Marcus said, and to get my son. And Brittany, I asked. Marcus looked at me. For the first time in 10 years, I saw myself in his eyes. I saw the iron. I saw the clay. Brittany can pay for her own soy latte, he said. He turned and walked toward the door. He walked different. His stride was longer. His back was straighter. Marcus, I called out. He stopped and turned. The penthouse has a guest room, I said. It is empty, and it has a view. Marcus nodded slowly. Thanks, Dad. I might need a place to stay, just for tonight. You have a place to stay for as long as you need, I said. You are a clay. We build our own shelter. He walked out into the rain. I watched him go. My heart was still aching for him, but it was a good ache. It was the pain of setting a broken bone so it could heal straight. The betrayal from within was over. Brittany had fired the last shot she would ever fire at my family. She thought she had broken him, but she had made a fatal error. She had broken the boy, but she had unleashed the man. I picked up my phone and texted Jonas. He knows. Prepare the divorce papers. Custody filings, first thing in the morning. I turned off the light in the warehouse, leaving the ghosts of the past in the dark. It was time to go home. My son was coming back to me. And tomorrow, we would go to war together. Some men learn from their mistakes, but men like Preston Walsh only learn how to hide them better. Or at least they think they do. I knew Preston wouldn't last a week in the mud. I knew his ego was too fragile to handle the humiliation of taking orders from men he used to underpay. I knew he was looking for an exit strategy. And in the world of corrupt men, an exit strategy always involves someone else's money. It was Wednesday, 3 days into Preston's new career as a site supervisor. I was sitting in the executive office on the 40th floor, the office that used to be his. The nameplate on the door now read Thaddeus Clay Chairman. From this height, the people down on the street looked like ants. And the construction site across the river where Preston was currently sweating through his designer shirt looked like a sandbox. Jonas was sitting opposite me. On the desk between us sat a laptop connected to the company's internal banking server. "Are you sure he will take the bait?" Jonas asked, adjusting his glasses. "It is a clumsy trap, Thaddeus. Leaving a vendor account with a dormant balance of $200,000 unlocked. It looks like a clerical error. A smart man would report it to IT." I smiled and poured myself a glass of bourbon. It was the same bottle Preston had been drinking from the night of the party. I had confiscated it along with the rest of his office inventory. A smart man would report it, I agreed, swirling the amber liquid. But a desperate man will see it as a miracle from God. Preston doesn't believe in clerical errors, Jonas. He believes the universe owes him a living. He believes he is entitled to every loose coin he finds in the sofa cushions of the world. Watch. We watched the screen. I had set the trap perfectly. During the transition of ownership, I had ordered all accounts frozen except for one, a legacy account used for overseas material procurement. It was an old account one Preston had used years ago to funnel kickbacks. I put $200,000 of my own money in there. Enough to buy a plane ticket and a new life in a non-extradition country. Or so he would think. Down at the construction site, the lunch whistle blew. I switched the monitor view to the security cameras I had installed in the site trailer. Preston walked in. He looked terrible. His silver hair was matted with sweat and dust. His face was sunburned. He was limping slightly from carrying lumber all morning. He looked around to make sure the trailer was empty. The foreman, Jerome, was outside eating a sandwich with the crew. Preston sat down at the computer terminal. His hands were shaking so badly he had to use his other hand to steady the mouse. "He is logging in," Jonas whispered, leaning forward. I watched Preston's face on the high-definition screen. I saw the moment he found the account. His eyes widened. He licked his dry lips. He looked over his shoulder one more time. "He thinks we missed it," I said quietly. "He thinks the old bricklayer and his lawyer were too busy counting the big pile to notice the small change." On the banking screen, a notification popped up. "User admin Walsh initiated transfer. Amount $199,000. Destination Cayman Islands Shell Corp." "He didn't even take the whole 200, Jonas noted. "He left $1,000. "He thinks that keeps it under the radar," I said, taking a sip of my drink. "Greed makes you stupid, but panic makes you predictable." I watched Preston hit the enter key. I could see the relief wash over him. He slumped back in the chair, closing his eyes. He probably thought he had just won the lottery. He was probably already mentally packing his bags, planning his escape to a beach where nobody knew his name. "Let it go through," I told Jonas. Jonas typed a command on his keyboard. "Transfer authorized." On the screen in the trailer, Preston opened a new tab. He went to a travel website. One-way ticket to Grand Cayman. Departing tonight at 8 p.m. He stood up. He didn't look like a broken old man anymore. He looked like the arrogant peacock I had met at Thanksgiving. He smoothed his dirty hair. He even smirked at the empty room. He walked out of the trailer, leaving the computer logged in. I picked up my phone. "Captain Miller," I said, "the crime has been committed. We have digital confirmation of wire fraud and embezzlement. The suspect is attempting to flee the jurisdiction. He is at the marshlands site." I hung up and stood by the window. 10 minutes later, the show began. It started with the sirens. Low at first, then growing into a wail that cut through the noise of the city. Down at the site, the workers stopped what they were doing. Cranes halted mid-swing. Jackhammers fell silent. 3 unmarked police cars skidded into the mud at the site entrance, followed by 2 patrol units. I zoomed the camera in. Preston was standing near the gate. He had just gotten into his muddy Mercedes. He was trying to start the engine. Captain Miller's car blocked the exit. Preston locked the doors. I could see him screaming inside the car. He was probably yelling that he was Preston Walsh, that he knew the mayor, that this was a mistake. But the police didn't care about his Rolodex. Captain Miller tapped on the window with his baton. Preston didn't open it, so Miller smashed it. The glass shattered, showering Preston with diamonds of safety glass. They dragged him out. It wasn't a dignified arrest. Preston fought. He kicked. He screamed. He slipped in the mud, the same mud he had refused to walk in 3 days ago. He went down on his knees, his expensive jeans soaking up the filth. Jerome and the rest of the crew gathered around, forming a circle. They didn't cheer, they didn't jeer, they just watched. There is a specific kind of justice in watching a man who thought he was a god get treated like a common criminal. Preston was cuffed, his hands pulled roughly behind his back. His face was pressed into the hood of the police car. I picked up my cell phone. I dialed Preston's number. On the screen, I saw the officer reach into Preston's pocket and pull out the ringing phone. The officer looked at the caller ID, then held the phone up to Preston's ear. "Answer it," Miller said. "It is your boss." Preston was crying now, snot and mud mixed on his face. "Thaddeus," he screamed into the phone. "Thaddeus, help me. It was a mistake. I was just moving funds. I was trying to protect the company assets. Tell them I am authorized." I took a slow sip of the bourbon. I let the silence stretch out across the miles, across the river, across the years of disrespect. "You are authorized to carry plywood, Preston," I said, my voice crystal clear in his ear. "You are not authorized to steal from me." "Thaddeus, please," he begged. "I will give it back. I will sign everything over. Just don't let them take me. I can't go to jail. I am not built for jail." "You are right," I said. "You are built for luxury. You are built for bourbon and silk sheets and looking down on people like me." I watched on the screen as he sagged against the car, all the fight leaving his body. "You called me worthless, Preston," I said softly. "Do you remember? You stood in your dining room surrounded by your friends, and you called me a worthless old buzzard." "Thaddeus." I looked at the balance on the screen. The $200,000 had already been frozen by the automated police trace I had set up. "So tell me, Preston," I asked. "You have no money, you have no home, you have no company, you have no family that will speak to you, and in about an hour, you're going to have a criminal record number instead of a name." I paused, taking one last look at the man who had tried to break my son. Who is worthless now? I didn't wait for an answer. I hung up. On the screen, the officer shoved him into the back of the patrol car. He looked small. He looked insignificant. I turned away from the window. Jonas closed the laptop. "It is done," Jonas said. "Not quite," I replied, setting the glass down. That was the king. Now I have to deal with the princess. I walked over to the coat rack and grabbed my hat. Preston Walsh was gone. He was no longer a threat. He was just a cautionary tale. But Brittany was still out there. And unlike her father, she didn't steal money. She stole souls. She had tried to steal my son's dignity and my grandson's childhood. Sending her to jail wasn't enough. I had to make sure that when she fell, she didn't have a safety net. I had to make sure that the world saw her exactly as I did. "Jonas," I said. "Yes, sir. Release the footage," I said. "The footage of the arrest," Jonas asked. "No," I said, opening the door. "The footage from the nanny cam in the living room, the one where she tells her friend that she wishes Leo would just disappear so she wouldn't have to pretend to be a mother anymore." Jonas' eyes widened. "That will destroy her socially, Thaddeus. She will be a pariah." I stepped into the hallway. "She destroyed herself, Jonas. I'm just turning on the lights." I walked to the elevator. The final phase had begun. The financial empire was secured. Now it was time for the moral reckoning. Family court smells like desperation and cheap floor wax. It is a place where love goes to die and where lawyers pick the carcass clean. I sat in the back row of courtroom 4B, my hands resting on the head of my cane even though I didn't really need it. I used it as a prop. A reminder that I was just an old grandfather observing the proceedings. But Brittany Walsh knew better. She sat at the plaintiff's table, stiff as a board, wearing a modest beige suit she had probably bought yesterday to look like a victim. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the judge, trying to project the image of a devoted mother and a wronged wife. Marcus sat at the defendant's table. He looked different than he had a week ago. The fear was gone from his eyes. He was wearing a simple suit one I had bought him, not the flashy designer labels Brittany used to dress him in. He sat with his spine straight, looking forward, ready to face the storm. Beside him sat Jonas, my lawyer, the shark in a three-piece suit. The judge was a woman named Judge Halloway. She had a reputation for being tough on deadbeat dads and even tougher on liars. She peered over her reading glasses, looking at the two parties. "We are here for the matter of Clay versus Clay," she said, her voice dry as dust. "Petition for divorce, division of assets and custody of the minor child, Leo Clay." Brittany's lawyer stood up. He was a slick man with too much gel in his hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your Honor." He began smoothing his tie. My client, Mrs. Clay, has been the victim of a sudden and brutal abandonment. Her husband, Mr. Marcus Clay, along with his father, has conspired to evict her from the marital home, cut off her financial resources, and inflict severe emotional distress. We are asking for an immediate freezing of all marital assets, including the residence at Highland Park, the investment accounts, and the luxury vehicles. We are asking for 50% of the total estate, which we estimate to be in the range of $10 million. I watched Brittany. She allowed a single tear to roll down her cheek. It was a masterful performance. She dabbed it away with a tissue, looking down at her hands. Judge Holloway turned to Jonas. Counsel, how do you respond? Jonas stood up slowly. He didn't have any flashy gestures. He just held up a single sheet of paper. Your Honor, there are no marital assets to freeze. Brittany's lawyer laughed, a short, condescending bark. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Marcus Clay is the son of Thaddeus Clay, a known real estate tycoon. The couple lived in a $5 million mansion. They drove cars worth 6 figures. To claim there are no assets is a blatant attempt to defraud the court. Jonas waited for him to finish. Mr. Clay is indeed the son of Thaddeus Clay, Jonas said, calm as a frozen lake. However, Marcus Clay does not own the mansion. The deed is held by Clay Construction. He does not own the cars. They are leased by the company. And as for his personal bank accounts, Jonas walked to the bench and handed the paper to the judge. This is a certified affidavit of net worth for Marcus Clay. His current checking account balance is $412.50. The judge looked at the paper. She frowned. Brittany stood up, losing her composure for a split second. That is a lie, she shrieked. He has millions. He bought me a $12,000 bag last month. Jonas turned to look at her. He bought that with a supplementary credit card attached to his father's business account, Jonas said. A card that has since been canceled. Marcus Clay was an employee of Clay Construction until recently. He has no equity in the company. He has no real estate. He has no stock portfolio. In the eyes of the law, Mrs. Clay, you are divorcing a man who is effectively unemployed and homeless. Brittany sank back into her chair. Her face went pale. The math was hitting her. 50% of $400 was $200. She looked at her lawyer, who was frantically shuffling through his papers, looking for a loophole that didn't exist. I sat in the back row and allowed myself a very small, very cold smile. This was the beauty of the trap. Brittany had married the lifestyle, not the man. She never bothered to check whose name was on the checks. She assumed that being a Clay meant she owned the empire. She didn't realize she was just a guest in the castle. Judge Holloway looked at Brittany's lawyer. Counsel, unless you can prove that Mr. Clay is hiding assets under his own name, I am inclined to accept this affidavit. There is nothing to divide. Brittany's lawyer whispered something in her ear. Brittany's eyes narrowed. She nodded. If there is no money, Your Honor, the lawyer said, pivoting instantly, then we must discuss support. My client demands full physical and legal custody of the minor child, Leo Clay. Marcus stiffened. This was the real fight. The lawyer continued, his voice rising with righteous indignation. Since Mr. Clay is by his own admission unemployed and homeless, he is unfit to care for a 5-year-old child. My client, however, is a devoted mother. She requests spousal support and child support in the amount of $15,000 a month to maintain the lifestyle the child is accustomed to. There it was. She didn't want Leo. She wanted the check attached to him. She knew that even if Marcus was broke, I would never let my grandson starve. She was banking on me paying the ransom. Jonas looked at me. I nodded. Your Honor, Jonas said, we contest the custody request. In fact, we are filing a cross-petition for sole custody to be awarded to the father with supervised visitation only for the mother. Brittany laughed out loud. It was a harsh, ugly sound. Supervised, she spat. I am a perfect mother. You can't take my son. Jonas walked back to his table and picked up a laptop. Your Honor, we would like to submit Exhibit B into evidence. These are video files recovered from the security system inside the marital home. Brittany went still. She knew there were cameras, but she thought she controlled them. She thought they were just for security against burglars. She didn't know they recorded audio, and she didn't know I had the master key. Judge Holloway nodded. Proceed. Jonas connected the laptop to the courtroom monitor. The first video played. It was dated 3 weeks ago. It showed the living room of the mansion. It was 2 in the afternoon. On the screen, Brittany was lying on the sofa, a bottle of wine on the floor next to her, half empty. She was on the phone. Leo was sitting on the rug crying. He was holding his arm. Mommy, Leo cried in the video, his voice tinny but clear. Mommy, I hurt my arm. I fell. Brittany didn't even look at him. She covered her other ear with her hand. Hold on, Chad, she said into the phone. The brat is screaming again. I swear sometimes I wish he would just disappear. It would be so much easier to leave if I didn't have this baggage. The courtroom was silent. Brittany's face turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. Jonas clicked the next file. This one was from a week ago, late at night. Brittany was stumbling around the kitchen, clearly intoxicated. Leo walked in wearing his pajamas. Mommy, I am hungry, he said. Go back to bed, Brittany screamed, throwing a wine glass into the sink. It shattered. Leo flinched and ran out of the room. Brittany slumped onto the counter, muttering, I hate this life. I hate pretending to care about these people. Jonas paused the video. The freeze frame showed Brittany's face twisted in a snarl of pure malice. Your Honor, Jonas said softly. As you can see, Mrs. Clay refers to her son as baggage. She expresses a desire for him to disappear, and there are 12 more hours of footage documenting severe alcohol abuse and neglect. Judge Holloway looked at the screen, then she looked at Brittany. The judge's expression was one of absolute disgust. Is this authentic? The judge asked. The timestamps are verified, Your Honor, Jonas said, and we have the metadata. Brittany stood up, knocking her chair over. That is an invasion of privacy, she screamed. You can't use that. That was in my own home. A home you didn't own, Jonas corrected her. A home owned by Thaddeus Clay, who authorized the security system for the protection of his property and his family. Sit down, Mrs. Clay, the judge barked, slamming her gavel. Brittany didn't sit. She looked at Marcus. You did this, she hissed. You let them spy on me. You are a coward, Marcus. You are nothing without your daddy. Marcus stood up then. He looked her right in the eye. I am a father, Marcus said, his voice steady and strong. And a father protects his son, even from his mother if he has to. Judge Holloway cleared her throat. I have seen enough, she said. The court finds that it is in the best interest of the child to be placed in the immediate sole custody of the father. Brittany gasped. Furthermore, the judge continued looking at the financial documents based on the evidence of substance abuse and neglect. I am ordering a strict visitation schedule. Mrs. Clay, you will be allowed 2 hours of supervised visitation every other weekend, to be conducted at a court-approved facility. 2 hours, Brittany screamed. But the child's support. What about the support? The judge peered over her glasses. Since Mr. Clay has no income and you are visibly capable of working, there will be no spousal support. As for child support, since you do not have custody, you will be the one paying Mr. Clay. Paying him? Brittany shrieked. I don't have a job. Then I suggest you get one, the judge said coldly. I am setting a temporary order of $200 a month. Next case. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. Brittany stood there frozen. In the span of 10 minutes, she had gone from a socialite expecting a multi-million-dollar settlement to a divorced, unemployed woman with a $200 monthly debt and no home. Her lawyer was already packing his briefcase. He knew he wasn't getting paid. Marcus looked at me across the courtroom. He nodded. A small, subtle nod. We walked out together. In the hallway, Brittany came running after us. Marcus, she cried, grabbing his arm. Marcus, wait. This is crazy. We can fix this. I can stop drinking. I will go to rehab. Just don't take Leo. He is all I have. Marcus pulled his arm away gently but firmly. He is not all you have, Brittany, Marcus said. You have your freedom. You said you wished he would disappear. Well, he didn't. But you did. He turned and walked away. Brittany looked at me. Her eyes were wild, desperate. Thaddeus, she begged. You can't let him do this. You have a heart, right? You are a grandfather. I stopped and leaned on my cane, looking down at her. I am a grandfather, Brittany, I said, and that is why I am doing this. I am creating a trust fund for Leo today. It will pay for his education, his first car, his first house. He will never want for anything. Her eyes lit up for a second, hearing the word money. But I continued leaning in close so only she could hear. The trust has a clause, a very specific clause. If Leo ever knowingly provides financial assistance to his biological mother, he forfeits the entire inheritance. She recoiled as if I had slapped her. So you see, Brittany, I said, you are not just out of the family, you are a liability. If you truly love him, you will stay away, because the closer you get, the poorer he becomes. I tipped my hat. Goodbye, Brittany. I walked down the long marble hallway towards the exit where the sun was shining. Marcus was waiting for me by the door. We stepped out into the fresh air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. The leech had been removed. The wound was clean. Now the healing could finally begin. Rebuilding a man is a lot harder than building a skyscraper, because when you build a tower, you start with a clean, empty lot. But when you rebuild a man, you have to clear away the rubble first. Marcus moved into the guest room of my penthouse on a rainy Tuesday night, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a heavy heart. He looked like a refugee from a war he didn't even know he was fighting. For the first 2 days, he didn't say much, he just slept. He slept for 12 hours at a time, as if his body was finally shutting down after years of running on the high-octane anxiety that Brittany had fueled him with. I didn't wake him up. I let him rest, because I knew that the work ahead of us was going to require every ounce of strength he had. I went to the office and handled the legal fallout of the divorce. I set up the trust fund for Leo. I kept the world at bay so my son could find his footing. On the third morning, I woke up at 4:30 as I always do. The city was still dark, a sprawling grid of amber lights beneath a velvet sky. I made a pot of strong black coffee and fried some bacon. The smell must have drifted down the hallway, because a few minutes later Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked lost. He was wearing a pair of silk pajamas that probably cost more than my first car. He stood there rubbing his eyes, looking at the coffee pot like it was a foreign object. "Good morning, Dad," he mumbled. "Why are we up so early? Is there an emergency?" I poured him a mug and slid it across the granite counter. "There is no emergency, Marcus," I said, taking a sip of my own coffee. "The workday starts at 6. If you want to beat the traffic, you have to be out the door by 5:15. Marcus looked confused. "Work?" he asked. "Dad, I don't have a job. You know that. I was fired. My company car is gone. I am technically unemployed." I looked him up and down, taking in the silk pajamas and the soft hands that hadn't held anything heavier than a steering wheel in a decade. "You are not unemployed, Marcus," I said. "You are a clay, and clays build things. You start today." He perked up a little. A glimmer of his old entitlement sparked in his eyes. "Oh, okay," he said. "You mean at the headquarters?" "What am I doing? VP of Operations?" "Marketing Director." "I can handle marketing, Dad. I have some great ideas about rebranding." I laughed. It was a deep rumble that came from my chest. "No marketing, Marcus, and definitely no operations. You are not ready to sit in a leather chair. You have spent too long sitting in soft chairs listening to soft people tell you lies." I walked over to a cardboard box I had left by the door. I kicked it open. Inside were a pair of steel-toed boots, a yellow hard hat, and a set of heavy canvas coveralls. "You are starting where I started, Marcus. You are starting where your grandfather started. You are going to the Marshlands Project, and you are going to be on the concrete crew." Marcus stared at the boots. He looked terrified. "Dad," he stammered, "I can't pour concrete. I have a degree in business administration. I have a master's degree." "And look where those degrees got you," I said, pointing at him with my coffee mug. "They got you a wife who despises you, a bank account that is empty, and a broken heart. You know how to read a spreadsheet, Marcus, but you don't know how to read a man. You don't know the value of $1 because you never sweat for it. You just swiped a card." I walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "I am not punishing you, son. I am inoculating you. I am giving you the only cure I know for weakness: hard labor. Now go get dressed. And Marcus." "Yeah, Dad, lose the silk. You wear that on a job site, the men will eat you alive." 10 minutes later, Marcus walked out of his room carrying a trash bag. He walked straight to the service chute in the hallway. I watched as he opened the bag. Inside were the pastel polo shirts, the skinny jeans, the loafers with the little tassels that Brittany loved so much. He didn't hesitate. He shoved the entire bag down the chute. I heard it slide away down 40 floors to the compactor in the basement. He turned around. He was wearing an old gray t-shirt and a pair of jeans he had found in the back of his closet. He looked younger. He looked real. "Let's go," he said. The drive to the site was quiet. We didn't take the town car. We took my truck. The suspension was stiff, and the cab smelled of diesel and old coffee. Marcus sat in the passenger seat looking out at the city as it woke up. He watched the delivery trucks, the street sweepers, the people waiting for the bus. For the first time, he was seeing the gears that made the city run, not just the shiny surface. When we arrived at the marshlands, the sun was just cresting over the river. The mud was thick and gray. Jerome was there waiting by the mixer. He saw Marcus step out of the truck wearing the fresh, stiff coveralls and the shiny new boots. Jerome didn't smile. He just nodded. "So this is the new recruit," Jerome rumbled. "This is him," I said, leaning against the truck. "Treat him like anyone else, Jerome. If he slows down the line, you yell at him. If he messes up the mix, you make him do it again. No special treatment." "Understood, boss," Jerome said. He turned to Marcus and tossed him a pair of heavy leather gloves. "Put these on, college boy. We are pouring the foundation for Building C today. 80-pound bags. You are on the hopper." For the next 8 hours, I sat in the trailer and watched my son die and be reborn. The first hour was brutal. Marcus struggled to lift the bags of cement. He coughed in the dust. He slipped in the mud. He looked at me through the window, his eyes pleading for a break, pleading for me to come save him, to tell him it was all just a lesson and he could go back to the air conditioning. But I didn't move. I drank my coffee and I reviewed the blueprints. I knew that if I saved him now, I would lose him forever. He needed to find his limit, and then he needed to push past it. By noon, he was unrecognizable. He was covered in gray dust from head to toe. His face was streaked with sweat and mud. He was moving slower, but he was still moving. I saw Jerome walk over to him. Marcus flinched, expecting to be yelled at, but Jerome just handed him a water bottle. "Pace yourself, kid," Jerome said loud enough for me to hear. "Lift with your legs, and stop thinking about how heavy it is. Just think about the next bag, just the next one." Marcus drank the water in one gulp. He nodded. He wiped his mouth with the back of his dirty glove. "Thanks," he said. He picked up the next bag, and he threw it into the hopper with a grunt that sounded primal. By 3 o'clock, the pour was done. The crew was exhausted, sitting on the tailgates of their trucks, smoking cigarettes and joking. Marcus was sitting on a pile of lumber, his head hanging between his knees. His hands were shaking so hard he couldn't unlace his boots. I walked over to him. "Ready to go home?" I asked. Marcus looked up. His face was gaunt with exhaustion, but his eyes were clear, clearer than I had seen them in years. "Is the job done?" he asked. "For today," I said. "But concrete doesn't wait. We have to be back tomorrow to smooth it out." "I will be here," Marcus said. He stood up. He groaned as his back muscles protested, but he stood up straight. On the drive home, he fell asleep instantly. He snored a deep, rhythmic snore that rattled the window. I looked over at him and felt a surge of pride that almost brought tears to my eyes. This was my son, not the puppet Brittany had paraded around at parties. This was a man who had done a day's work. That night I cooked steaks, big ribeyes seared in a cast-iron skillet with garlic and butter. We sat at the kitchen table in the penthouse. Marcus ate like a starving wolf. He didn't use a napkin. He didn't worry about table manners. He just ate. "How are your hands?" I asked. Marcus held them up. They were red raw and beginning to blister. "They hurt," he said. "Everything hurts. My back, my legs, even my fingers." "Good," I said, cutting into my steak. "That pain is real, Marcus. It is honest pain. It is not the pain of wondering if your wife loves you or if your friends are laughing at you. It is the pain of building something." He looked at his hands, turning them over. Jerome said, "I did okay," he said quietly. He said, "I didn't quit." "Jerome doesn't give compliments lightly," I said. "If he said you did okay, it means you did good." Marcus took a sip of his beer. "You know, Dad," he said, looking out at the city lights, "today was the hardest day of my life, but it was the first day in 5 years where I didn't feel anxious. I didn't check my phone once. I didn't worry about what I was wearing. I just worked." "That is the secret, son," I said. "When you are fighting the earth, when you are wrestling with concrete and steel, the petty noise in your head goes quiet. You find out who you are." Over the next few weeks, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The soft layer of fat that had accumulated around Marcus' waist from years of expensive dinners melted away, replaced by corded muscle. His skin lost that pale indoor pallor and turned a deep, rich bronze. His walk changed. He stopped shuffling. He strode. He took up space. He stopped talking about the divorce. He stopped asking about Brittany. It was as if she belonged to a different life, a different version of himself that no longer existed. One Friday evening, about a month after he started, we were sitting on the balcony. Marcus was wearing a clean white t-shirt and jeans. His arms were thick, his shoulders broad. He looked like me when I was 30. "Dad," he said, "yeah, I want to thank you." "For what?" "The job." "No," Marcus said. "For the demolition. For tearing down the gate. For cutting the power. For forcing me into the mud." He looked me in the eye. "I was drowning in that mansion, Dad. I was drowning in debt and lies, and I didn't even know it. I thought I was happy because I had the things I was supposed to have. But I was empty." He took a breath. "You broke my life apart," he said, "but you saved me." I reached out and squeezed his shoulder. My hand felt the solid muscle beneath his shirt. "I didn't save you, Marcus," I said softly. "I just gave you the tools. You saved yourself. You picked up the bag. You kept moving." He smiled. A real smile, one that reached his eyes. "Jerome says I am ready for framing next week," he said. "He says I have graduated from the mud." "Don't get cocky," I laughed. "Framing is precision work. If you are off by 1/8 of an inch, the whole wall comes down." "I can handle it," Marcus said. "I am a clay." "Yes, you are," I said, raising my beer bottle. "Yes, you are." We sat there in the silence, listening to the wind howl around the skyscrapers. Down below in the city, Brittany was probably somewhere trying to hustle her next victim, trying to find someone else to carry her baggage. But up here, high above the noise, there was only peace. My son was back. Not the boy I raised, but the man he had forged himself into. And looking at him, I knew that the empire was finally in safe hands. He had learned the most important lesson of all. You don't inherit respect. You build it brick by heavy brick. They say a bad penny always turns up, but in my experience, it is not just the pennies you have to worry about. It is the counterfeit bills. The people who look real on the surface but have absolutely no value underneath. We had enjoyed a month of peace, a month of hard work and honest sweat. Marcus was healing, the company was stabilizing, and my grandson Leo was finally laughing again. But peace is fragile when you are dealing with narcissists. They do not know how to fade away quietly. They need the spotlight even if it burns them. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was in the lobby of the Clay Tower reviewing the blueprints for a new community center we were bidding on. Marcus was with me wearing his work boots and a clean button-down shirt. He looked solid, grounded. Then we heard the commotion. "Security, please stop her," a guard shouted. I looked up. Bursting through the revolving doors was Brittany. But she wasn't the defeated woman I had left at the courthouse. She had done her hair. She was wearing a white dress that made her look innocent, angelic even. And she was crying. Not the silent, dignified tears of genuine grief, but the loud, theatrical sobs of a woman who knows she has an audience. She wasn't alone. Behind her were 2 men with cameras. Paparazzi. Or maybe just freelance stringers she had hired with the last of her money. "Marcus," she screamed, running toward us. "Marcus, please let me see my son." The security guards moved to intercept her, but I held up a hand. "Let her come," I said softly to Marcus. "Let everyone see who she really is." Brittany threw herself at Marcus's feet. She literally fell to her knees on the marble floor. The cameras flashed blindingly. "They took him from me," she wailed, looking directly into the camera lens. "My baby. My Leo. They used their money to steal my child. Marcus, please. I know you still love me. I know this isn't you. It is your father. It is that evil old man controlling you." She pointed a manicured finger at me. "He is a monster," she screamed. "He hates me because I am white. He hates me because I am young. He wants to destroy our family." I stood there leaning on my cane watching the performance. It was impressive. If I didn't know she had called her son a brat and wished he would disappear, I might have even felt sorry for her. Marcus looked down at her. He didn't flinch. He didn't reach out to help her up. "Get up, Brittany," Marcus said, his voice calm and deep. "You are embarrassing yourself. I am a mother fighting for her child." She sobbed, grabbing his pant leg. "How is that embarrassing? I have nothing, Marcus. Your father took my home. He took my jewelry. He took my dignity. He took nothing," Marcus said. "You sold it. You sold us out, Brittany, for a trainer named Chad. Remember him? Brittany froze. She didn't think Marcus would say that in front of the cameras. That is a lie, she hissed low enough that the microphones couldn't pick it up. That is a dirty lie. Marcus stepped back, disengaging from her grip. Go home, Brittany. You have a visitation hearing next month. Until then, stay away from me and stay away from my father. As the guards escorted her out, still screaming for justice, my phone buzzed. It was Jonas. Turn on the television, Thaddeus, Jonas said. Channel 5, right now. I walked over to the reception desk where a large screen was playing the morning news. I asked the guard to turn up the volume. There on the screen was Preston Walsh. He was out on bail. God knows who paid it. Maybe a loan shark, maybe a foolish friend from his country club days. He was standing on the steps of the courthouse surrounded by reporters. He looked haggard, but he was wearing a suit. He was channeling every ounce of his old arrogance. I am a victim. Preston was shouting into a cluster of microphones. Thaddeus Clay is not a businessman. He is a predator. He is a slumlord who exploits the working class. He tricked me. He stole my company through a hostile takeover based on fraudulent documents. And now he is forcing me, a 60-year-old man with a heart condition, to work in a mud pit. It is slavery. That is what it is. He is trying to enslave me because of his own racial vendetta. The reporters were scribbling furiously. It was a juicy story. The poor fallen tycoon versus the vengeful construction mogul. He is an evil man, Preston continued, wiping sweat from his forehead. He doesn't care about this city. He only cares about power. He evicted my daughter and my grandson from their home. He threw them on the street. Is that the action of a hero? No, it is the action of a tyrant. I watched the screen. I felt the eyes of the people in the lobby turning toward me. They were wondering. Could it be true? Was the great Thaddeus Clay actually a monster? Dad Marcus said, standing beside me. We have to stop this. He is poisoning the public opinion. I turned off the TV. He wants a media war, I said. He thinks he can win in the court of public opinion because he lost in the court of law. He thinks because he yells the loudest he is telling the truth. So what do we do, Marcus asked. Do we sue him for defamation? No, I said, straightening my tie. A lawsuit takes years. The truth needs to be faster. I turned to the receptionist. Call Jonas. Tell him to book the ballroom at the Grand Hotel for 3 o'clock this afternoon. Invite every news outlet in the city. Tell them Thaddeus Clay has an announcement regarding the Walsh investigation. And Marcus. Yeah, Dad, go to the archives, get the payroll records for the last 5 years, get the safety violation reports that Preston tried to bury, and get the emails where he called his own workers disposable assets. We are going to show them exactly what kind of man Preston Walsh is. At 3 o'clock, the ballroom was packed. The air was thick with anticipation. Preston's accusations had been running on a loop all day. People loved a scandal. I walked onto the stage. I was wearing my best suit. Marcus stood to my right. Jonas stood to my left. I didn't sit behind a table. I stood at the podium alone. I adjusted the microphone. Good afternoon, I said. My voice didn't waver. It filled the room. Mr. Preston Walsh called me a tyrant today. He called me a slumlord. He claimed I stole his company. I paused, looking directly into the camera, knowing Preston was watching. I did not steal his company. I salvaged it. And today I am going to show you what I salvaged it from. The screen behind me lit up. It wasn't a graph. It was a list of names. These are the names of the 30 subcontractors Preston Walsh refused to pay in the last 2 years, I said. Plumbers, electricians, framers, men and women who did the work and went home with empty pockets because Preston Walsh needed a new Mercedes. The screen changed. It showed photos of the unsafe working conditions at Preston's sites. Rotted scaffolding, moldy drywall. This is what he calls a business, I continued. He calls me a slumlord. But these are the buildings he built. He cut corners on safety to pad his own pockets. He put lives at risk. And as for his family, I said, my voice dropping to a hush. The screen changed again. It showed the foreclosure notice on the mansion. And right next to it, the receipt for the sapphire necklace Brittany had sold, and the transcripts of the text messages where they mocked the very workers who built their house. I did not evict a family, I said. I evicted parasites who were feeding on the legacy of honest labor. I evicted people who would sell a dead woman's jewelry to buy a purse. A murmur went through the crowd. The reporters were shocked. This wasn't just corporate spinning. This was raw evidence. But I am not here to talk about the past, I said. I am here to talk about the future. I signaled to Marcus. He stepped forward holding a large check. It was covered with a cloth. Preston Walsh said, I only care about power, I said. He said I hoard money. Marcus pulled the cloth away. The check was made out for $10 million. This is the profit from the Clay Construction Group for this fiscal year, I announced. In the past, this money might have gone to bonuses or luxury cars, but today it is going somewhere else. I looked at the camera again. I am announcing the formation of the Lucille Clay Foundation for Vocational Excellence, named after my late wife, a woman who knew the value of hard work. The reporters started snapping photos furiously. This money will not go to building penthouses, I said. It will go to trade schools. It will provide full scholarships for young men and women from this city who want to learn a trade, who want to be electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and masons. We are going to build a new generation of builders. I pointed at the check. And one more thing. We are setting up a legal defense fund for every subcontractor Preston Walsh cheated. If he owes you money, come to us. We will pay you, and then we will collect from him. The room erupted. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar. I stepped back from the podium. The news cycle shifted instantly. By 6 o'clock, Preston wasn't a victim anymore. He was a pariah. The footage of his unpaid workers, the safety violations, and the revelation of the foundation painted a picture that no amount of crying could fix. Preston tried to go to dinner that night at his favorite Italian restaurant. We heard about it later. The owner stopped him at the door. We don't serve your kind here, the owner told him. My brother was one of the electricians you stiffed. Preston was turned away. He walked down the street alone, jeered at by passers-by who recognized him from the news. He had tried to destroy my reputation, but he had only succeeded in illuminating his own corruption. That evening, Marcus and I sat in the penthouse watching the news. They were interviewing a young kid from the inner city who had just heard about the scholarship. The kid was crying, saying he could finally afford to go to welding school. You did good, Dad, Marcus said quietly. You turned the poison into medicine. We did good, Marcus, I corrected him. You pulled those files. You organized the data. I looked at my son. The enemy is gone, Marcus. Preston is finished. Brittany is irrelevant. They are just noise in the background now. I stood up and walked to the window. Now we can get back to work, I said. Real work. The city lights twinkled below us. They didn't look like cold, uncaring eyes anymore. They looked like opportunities. Thousands of lights, and each one needed a builder to keep it burning. I was Thaddeus Clay. I was a bricklayer, and I had just laid the strongest foundation of my life. Time is a wheel, and if you wait long enough, it always comes back around to where it started. Exactly 365 days had passed since the night Preston Walsh threw a glass of expensive bourbon in my face and told me to learn my place. A lot can happen in a year. Empires can crumble, fortunes can evaporate, and men who thought they were gods can find out they are just mortals after all. It was Thanksgiving again, but this year the air in my penthouse didn't smell of tension and pretension. It smelled of collard greens and roasted turkey and sweet potato pie. It smelled of home. I looked around my living room and I didn't see a single person who was there for my money. I saw Jerome the foreman laughing with a mouthful of stuffing. I saw Jonas, my lawyer, loosening his tie and playing catch with Leo on the rug. I saw the young welding student who had received the first scholarship from the Lucille Clay Foundation telling a story to a group of rapt listeners. And I saw Marcus. My son was in the kitchen wearing a stained apron that said Grill Master. He was carving the turkey. His hands were different now. They were calloused. They had small scars from tie wire and lumber. They were the hands of a man who worked for a living. He was laughing at something Jerome said, his head thrown back, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He looked tired in the good way. The way you look when you have earned your rest. He caught me watching him and walked over, wiping his hands on a towel. Happy Thanksgiving, Dad, he said, handing me a glass of iced tea. Happy Thanksgiving, son, I said, clinking my glass against his. He looked out at the room, at the eclectic mix of construction workers, lawyers, and neighbors. It is better this way, isn't it? Marcus asked softly. No stiff suits, no judging eyes, just people. It is real, I said, and real is the only thing that lasts. Leo ran over and hugged Marcus's leg. Daddy Jerome said I can ride in the crane next week, can I? Can I please? Marcus picked him up and swung him around. If you finish your vegetables, we will see about the crane, little man. But you have to wear your helmet. I watched them and felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the heating system. The rot was gone. The foundation had been repaired. The house of clay was standing strong. But there was one last piece of business I had to attend to. One final inspection to make sure the past was truly buried. I slipped out of the party quietly. Nobody noticed me leave except Jonas, who gave me a knowing nod. He knew where I was going. I took the elevator down to the garage. I walked past the luxury sedans and the sports cars. I walked straight to my old Ford pickup truck. The one Preston had sneered at. The one Brittany had refused to ride in because it was too dirty. I climbed in and turned the key. The engine roared to life, a familiar, comforting sound. I drove out into the cold November night. The city was quiet. Most people were at home with their families, but not everyone. Some people were working the shifts nobody else wanted. Some people were paying the price for a lifetime of bad decisions. I drove toward the river, past the shiny skyscrapers I had built, past the trendy restaurants where I used to pay the bill for people who didn't respect me. I drove until the neighborhoods got darker and the streets got rougher. I pulled into the entrance of a long-term parking lot near the airport. It was a bleak place, a sea of gray asphalt surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The wind whipped across the open space carrying trash and dead leaves. In the center of the exit lane sat a small fiberglass booth. It was barely big enough for one person. A single fluorescent light flickered inside, casting a sickly green glow. I pulled my truck up to the window. The engine idle was loud in the silence. Inside the booth, a man was huddled over a small space heater. He was wearing a uniform that was 2 sizes too big for him. The polyester jacket was cheap and thin. He was reading a crumpled newspaper, trying to stay awake. He heard the truck and stood up slowly. He slid the glass window open. A blast of cold air hit him and he shivered. "That will be $12, he said without looking up. He held out a trembling hand for the ticket. I didn't say anything. I just handed him the ticket. He took it and punched it into the machine. "You overstayed by 10 minutes, so I have to charge you for the extra hour," he recited, his voice flat and lifeless. "It is policy." "I know the policy, Preston," I said. He froze. His head snapped up. For a moment he didn't recognize me. The shadows from the brim of my baseball cap hid my eyes. But then I leaned forward into the light. "Thaddeus," he whispered. The color drained from his face, leaving it gray and pasty. He looked old, older than his 60 years. His hair, which used to be perfectly coiffed, was thin and wispy under the cheap security guard cap. His eyes were sunken, rimmed with red. He looked like a man who had been chewed up by the world and spit out here in this lonely booth. "Hello, Preston," I said calmly. "Working the holiday shift, I see." He stepped back as if I had hit him. He looked around wildly as if expecting a camera crew or a police officer, but there was nobody. Just me and him and the cold wind. "What do you want?" he stammered. "Are you here to gloat? Are you here to laugh at me? Go ahead, laugh. I am a parking attendant. Is that what you wanted to see?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had stood in his mansion a year ago and treated me like a servant. I looked at the man who had stolen from his own workers. I looked at the man who had called me worthless. And I felt nothing. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a profound sense of pity. He was a ghost, a hollow shell of a man who had never understood that dignity doesn't come from a bank account. "I am not here to gloat, Preston," I said. "I was just in the neighborhood." "You liar," he spat, trying to summon some of his old venom, but it came out weak and pathetic. "You came here to rub my nose in it. You ruined me, Thaddeus. You took my company. You took my house. You turned the whole city against me. You did that yourself, Preston," I said. "I just let gravity do its work." I reached into my pocket. Preston flinched, thinking I was reaching for a weapon or a subpoena. But I pulled out my wallet. I opened it and took out a crisp $100 bill. "The parking fee is $12. Preston said, his eyes locked on the money. "I know," I said. I handed him the bill. He took it, his fingers brushing against mine. His skin was cold and rough. "Keep the change," I said. He stared at the bill. $100. It was probably more than he made in 2 days sitting in this freezer. "Why?" he asked, looking up at me confused. "Why would you give me this?" I put the truck in gear. I looked him dead in the eye one last time. "Because it is Thanksgiving, Preston," I said. And nobody should go thirsty on Thanksgiving. I paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. Keep it to buy Bourbon, Preston. His mouth dropped open. He remembered. Of course he remembered. The memory of that night, the night he splashed me, the night he sealed his fate, was burned into his brain just as deeply as it was into mine. He stood there, clutching the bill, the wind howling around his little glass cage. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He just stood there and watched as the worthless old buzzard drove away. I pulled out of the lot and turned onto the highway. A few miles down the road, I passed a diner. It was a rundown place with a neon sign that buzzed and flickered. Through the large plate glass window, I saw a waitress. She was blonde. She looked tired. She was wiping down a table while a customer yelled at her for something, probably cold coffee or bad service. It was Brittany. I didn't stop. I didn't honk. I didn't need to go in there and tip her. Life had already tipped her exactly what she deserved. She had wanted to be served hand and foot, and now she was serving others for minimum wage. The universe has a poetic sense of humor if you pay attention. I drove back toward the city. The skyline was lit up ahead of me. I could see the clay tower rising above the others, its lights shining steady and strong. I felt lighter. The weight I had been carrying for a year, the anger, the need for retribution, it was all gone. I had closed the book. I pulled into the garage of the penthouse and parked the old truck next to Marcus's new work truck. I took the elevator up. The party was still going strong. I could hear the music before the doors even opened. It was a jazz record. Coltrane. I walked inside. Marcus looked up from the sofa where he was reading a book to Leo. "Where did you go, Dad?" he asked. "Just running an errand, son," I said, taking off my coat. "Just clearing out some old trash." I walked over and sat down next to them. Leo climbed into my lap. "Grandpa, did you bring me a surprise?" he asked. I hugged him tight, smelling the baby shampoo in his hair. "I brought you the best surprise of all, Leo," I said. "What is it?" he asked, eyes wide. I looked at Marcus, who was smiling at me. He knew. He didn't know where I had gone, but he knew I had come back with peace. "The surprise is that we are free, Leo," I said. "We are free to be exactly who we are." And as I sat there, surrounded by the family I had fought for and the family I had built, I realized that Preston was wrong about one thing. I wasn't a bricklayer. I was an architect. I had designed a life where loyalty mattered more than royalty, where sweat was worth more than silk, and where a man's worth wasn't measured by what he had, but by what he could endure. I closed my eyes and listened to the laughter. It was the sweetest sound in the world. It was the sound of a job well done. The snow had finally melted, leaving the earth soft and smelling of new life. It was a Sunday morning, the kind of quiet morning that feels like a blessing. I drove my old truck out to the cemetery on the edge of town. I walked up the hill to the spot under the willow tree where Lucille had been resting for 10 years. I cleaned the granite headstone until I could see my own reflection in the stone. I placed a bouquet of fresh hydrangeas in the vase. They were her favorite. I sat down on the stone bench and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, my chest didn't feel tight. The war was over. The dust had settled. I told her everything. I spoke out loud, even though I knew she could hear my heart without words. I told her about the necklace. I told her how I had rescued it from the hands of strangers and how it was safe now, locked away for the day, when a woman worthy of her legacy would wear it. I told her about our son. I told her that Marcus had come back to us. Not the boy she left behind, but a man who knew the weight of a hammer and the value of $1. I told her that he wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't hiding behind a checkbook. He was standing on his own 2 feet. I sat there for an hour just listening to the wind in the willow branches. I felt her presence. I felt her telling me that I had done good, that I had been the iron she always knew I was. Life has a way of filling the empty spaces if you let it. 2 years have passed since the day I drove away from Preston at that parking booth, and the penthouse isn't empty anymore. Marcus met Sarah 6 months after the divorce was finalized. She wasn't a socialite. She wasn't a model. She was a kindergarten teacher at the public school in the district where we built the community center. She was a beautiful woman with skin the color of deep mahogany and a laugh that made you want to tell her all your secrets. She didn't know I was Thaddeus Clay the tycoon. She just knew I was the old man who came to read to the kids on Tuesdays. She fell in love with Marcus when he was covered in drywall dust wearing his work boots. She fell in love with the builder, not the bank account. They got married last month. It wasn't a grand affair. There were no news crews, no $1,000 flower arrangements. It was in the backyard of the house Marcus bought with his own money. A modest house, but a solid one. I watched them dance. I saw the way Sarah looked at him. She looked at him with respect. She looked at him like he was her partner, not her servant. And I saw the way she held Leo. She didn't call him baggage. She called him her blessing. Leo is 7 now. He is growing tall. He has my eyes and his father's smile. He doesn't remember much about the mansion or the cold white rooms where he wasn't allowed to touch anything. He remembers the crane rides. He remembers the fishing trips. He remembers that his grandfather is always there. Yesterday I took them both to the site of the new Clay Technical Institute. It is the biggest project of my life, a trade school funded entirely by the foundation. I held Leo in my arms and pointed to the steel beams rising into the sky. "Do you see that, Leo?" I asked. He nodded his eyes wide. "It is big, Grandpa," he said. "It is big," I agreed. "But do you know what holds it up?" "The steel," he asked. "No," I said. I tapped his chest right over his heart. "The men hold it up. The men and women who wake up early. The men and women who aren't afraid of dirt. The integrity of the builder holds up the building. Never forget that." Marcus walked over and put his arm around my shoulder. He was the project manager for the site. He was running the show now. "We are ready to pour the final slab, Dad," he said. I looked at him. I looked at the empire we had saved. It wasn't the buildings that mattered. It was this. The three of us standing together unbroken. Preston and Brittany are ghosts now. I hear rumors sometimes. I hear Preston is still working that parking booth, bitter and alone. I hear Brittany moved to another state looking for another victim. But they don't matter. They were just storms that passed through to test our foundations. We stood firm. We weathered the wind. And we are still standing. I am 74 years old now. My hands are getting tired. My walk is a little slower. But my heart is full. I have done my job. I have protected my blood. I have honored my wife. And I have taught my son that a man is not defined by what he owns, but by what he is willing to defend. Respect isn't given, it is earned. And once earned, it must be defended. I spent my life building skyscrapers from mud, believing that hard work would shield my family from prejudice. I was wrong. The real shield is boundaries. When someone spits on your dignity, you don't wipe it off and smile, you dismantle the platform they stand on. I didn't destroy Preston and Brittany because I hated them. I destroyed their entitlement to save my son and grandson. A man's legacy isn't just what he leaves behind in the bank, but the spine he instills in his children. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that no matter how old you are or where you come from, you have the right to demand respect. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand up to someone who thought they were better than you? I read every single comment. Until next time, keep building your own legacy.